Mama, I'm so cold. Those three words hit Sarah Mitchell like a blade through the chest. She pulled Lily tighter against her body, pressing her daughter's face into the hollow of her neck, feeling the child's lips blue at the edges, trembling brush against her collarbone. Outside, the storm was eating the world alive. Inside what was left of their broken-down Chevy, the last flicker of warmth was dying. If you've ever had nothing left to give, but gave it anyway, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow Sarah's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm had been building since early afternoon, stacking itself against the Midwest sky like something with a grudge, and by the time the sun disappeared, not set, just disappeared, swallowed whole by clouds the color of bruised metal, the temperature had dropped so fast that the rain turned to sleet before it even hit the ground. By 9 o'clock that night, the highway overpass on the south edge of Millhaven, Illinois, had become the only thing standing between Sarah Mitchell and the open cruelty of a February blizzard that weather services would later call the worst storm in 31 years. She hadn't chosen the overpass because it was safe. She'd chosen it because it was the last thing left. The Chevy had died 3 days ago. Transmission gone oil, sludge black, and bone-dry tires so bald they couldn't grip a dry road, let alone a frozen one. It had coasted to a stop just under the overpass on a Tuesday morning and hadn't moved since. She tried to start it a dozen times the first day, then 5 times the second, and this morning twice. Both times the engine gave a sound like something drowning and went quiet. She'd stopped trying after that. The battery wouldn't survive another failed attempt, and the battery was the only thing still running. The heat set at its lowest setting, 62 degrees, just enough to keep Lily's fingers from going numb. Now even that was almost gone. Sarah could see the battery indicator on the dashboard. The bar had been dropping since noon. By 7 that evening, it had crossed into red. And outside, the storm that had been threatening all day had finally arrived without apology, slamming into the overpass with 60-mile-an-hour gusts that made the concrete structure groan above them and rattled the car on its dead axles like it was made of tinfoil. Lily was 6 years old. She had Sarah's blonde hair currently matted and unwashed for 4 days. She had a gap between her 2 front teeth that she'd lost in October, and she had the kind of eyes that made strangers stop and say things like, "She's going to break hearts someday," which always made Sarah feel simultaneously proud and terrified because hearts were breakable things, and she knew that better than most. Lily was 6 years old, and she was sitting in Sarah's lap, wrapped in the only sleeping bag they owned, 2 sweaters layered over her pajamas, a knit hat pulled down to her eyebrows, and she was shivering. Not the small kind of shivering that comes and goes, the deep systemic kind that came from a body working too hard to stay alive for too long. "I know, baby," Sarah whispered into the top of Lily's head. "I know you're cold. Mama's got you. When's it gonna stop? Oh, soon. You said that before." "I know I did." "Mama, I'm hungry." Sarah closed her eyes. She counted 3 seconds behind her eyelids, 3 seconds where she let herself feel the full weight of that sentence, the way it landed in her gut, the way it rearranged everything inside her. Then she opened her eyes because 3 seconds was all she could afford. "We have soup," she said. "I'm going to heat it up in just a little while, okay? When I think the wind is going to be a little easier to walk in." "We only have the 1 can." "I know. You said we'd get more today." "The storm came faster than I thought it would." Lily was quiet for a moment, her small fingers working at the drawstring of the sleeping bag. Then, "Mama, are we going to be okay?" Sarah tightened her arms around her daughter. She pressed her mouth against Lily's temple. She could feel the cold radiating off the child's skin, even through the layers. She thought about lying. She was good at lying in the specific, merciful way that mothers learn when the truth is too jagged to hand to a 6-year-old. But Lily was looking up at her now, and those eyes were too serious, too watchful, too old for her face the way children's eyes get when they've spent too long reading their mother's expressions for information about whether the world was still safe or not. "We're going to make it through tonight," Sarah said carefully. "That's what we're going to do right now, just tonight." It wasn't a lie exactly. It was a smaller truth inside a larger fear. She had $43 in cash folded into the inside pocket of her jacket, 320s less than a week ago. Then groceries, then gas for a car that wouldn't start anyway, then a bag of chips and 2 protein bars from a gas station 2 miles away that she'd walked to and back in the cold 2 days ago. She had a prepaid cell phone with 11% battery and no data plan, just the ability to call 911 if things got desperate enough. She had a lighter, a half-empty box of crackers, a change of clothes for Lily, and a garbage bag in the trunk. A library card she could no longer use because the library branch had cut its hours. And one can of Campbell's tomato soup that she'd been saving for tonight, because she had known some animal brain part of her had known that tonight was going to be the hardest night of all of them. She'd been homeless for 61 days. She didn't count the days, anymore hadn't since day 30, but she'd counted up until then, and the number had lodged in her brain and refused to leave. It had started with the apartment, then the job, then in that terrible domino logic that people who'd never been poor couldn't understand one thing had simply led to the next. The apartment had been in Marcus's name, and when Marcus left, not dramatically, not with a fight, just quietly disappeared one Saturday afternoon while Lily was at her grandmother's, leaving nothing behind but a note that said, "I can't do this anymore," and half a tank of propane. The rent became Sarah's responsibility, and Sarah's income from the diner was enough to cover half of it on a good month. She'd tried. She'd picked up extra shifts. She'd asked her manager for an advance. She'd called her mother, who lived in Arizona, and whose voice on the phone made Sarah's chest tighten in ways she couldn't explain. Her mother had sent $200 in a long voicemail about the importance of making better choices. $200 lasted 11 days. By November 1st, she was 30 days behind on rent. By November 15th, she was getting notices slipped under the door. By the end of November, the county's eviction process had begun, and by December 17th, she was standing on the sidewalk with Lily on her hip and 2 garbage bags at her feet, watching the landlord change the lock on a door that used to be hers. She'd gone to the shelter first. Of course she had. The Family Crisis Center on Brennan Street had a waiting list of 41 families and a caseworker named Denise, who was kind but overworked and who told Sarah gently that they expected to have an opening by mid-February if she could check back in. This was mid-December. Mid-February was 60 days away. Sarah had nodded at Denise and thanked her, and carried Lily back out into the cold and sat in the Chevy in the shelter's parking lot for an hour, not crying, just calculating, figuring out what 60 days actually meant in terms of food and gas and warmth, and coming up with numbers that didn't work no matter how she arranged them. She'd spent 4 nights in the car in different parking lots before someone had suggested the overpass. Another woman older with a shopping cart and the particular 1,000-yard steadiness of someone who'd been doing this long enough to have stopped being scared of it, had told her that the highway overpass on Route 9 south of town blocked wind from 3 directions, and that the concrete held some heat from the day, and that the police didn't usually bother people there as long as they kept quiet. Sarah had found the overpass on December 21st and had stayed. That had been 8 weeks ago. 8 weeks in a dying car under a concrete overpass with a 6-year-old daughter, and tonight was the night the car finally gave out. And tonight was the night the worst storm in 3 decades decided to arrive. And tonight was the night she had 1 can of soup and $43 and 11% battery, and a child who was shivering so hard her teeth were clicking together softly in the dark. Sarah reached forward and turned the heater on for 60 seconds. Just 60. She counted them in her head. The air that came out was barely warm, more like less cold, but Lily made a small, grateful sound against her chest and pressed closer, and Sarah felt the familiar, specific agony of a mother who can give her child less than what that child deserves. She clicked the heater off at 61 seconds. She watched the battery indicator drop another fraction. "Tell me the boat story," Lily murmured. "You're not too tired." "No, tell me." Sarah pulled the sleeping bag tighter and began talking. Not thinking about the words, just letting them come the way she always did with this particular story, the one she'd invented 3 years ago when Lily was 3 and couldn't sleep, the one about 2 people on a small wooden boat in the middle of the ocean who were trying to find the shore. In the story, the boat had a name, the Lily May, of course, and it had a little stove on it that always stayed warm, and at night the stars were so bright you could read by them. Sarah's voice was steady. She kept it steady on purpose. Her voice was one of the last reliable things she could give her daughter, and she gave it carefully, the way you hand someone something irreplaceable. Lily was asleep within 7 minutes. Sarah kept talking for 2 more minutes after that because stopping felt like losing something she wasn't ready to let go of. Then she went quiet and sat in the dark and listened to the storm. The wind was savage. It came at the car in gusts that hit like body blows, and between gusts, the silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. The temperature inside the car had dropped to 58 degrees. She could see it on the thermometer. She kept clipped to the visor a small digital thing she'd bought at a dollar store 2 weeks ago, so she'd have something objective to argue with. When her own body told her it wasn't that cold, it was fine, she was overreacting. 58 degrees with the wind chill outside somewhere around -12. She needed to heat the soup. She'd bought a small camp stove at a Goodwill 6 weeks ago. Propane about the size of a coffee can came with 2 cartridges, one of which was already gone. The second cartridge was in the back seat along with the stove itself rolled in a towel. She would have to get out of the car to use it. She couldn't use it inside, not with Lily, not with the carbon monoxide risk, not in a vehicle with no circulation. She tried it once, and within 2 minutes she'd felt the headache starting at the base of her skull, and she turned it off immediately and sat with the doors open in the cold for 15 minutes afterward, terrified watching Lily's chest rise and fall. So she'd have to go out, into the storm, set up the stove, heat the soup, bring it back in. 10 minutes, maybe 15, in -12 wind chill, in 60-mile-per-hour gusts. She was calculating the logistics of this when she heard the sound. At first she thought it was the storm, another gust, another piece of highway infrastructure groaning under the weight of the wind. But it was different from that. It was mechanical and sudden, and it came from the road above on the highway proper, and it was followed half a second later by another sound that she recognized instinctively and viscerally. Even though she'd never heard one before in her life, the specific, high-pitched scream of a motorcycle losing control, the shriek of metal against asphalt, and then a crash so loud it shook the concrete above her and sent loose debris skittering down the embankment on the far side of the overpass. Lily jolted awake. "Mama, what was—" "Shh." Sarah was already reaching for the door handle. "Stay here. Do not get out of this car. Keep the sleeping bag around you." "Mama." "Lily." She turned and looked at her daughter. "I promise I'm coming right back, right back. But I need you to stay in this car and keep that sleeping bag tight and don't make a sound. Can you do that for me?" Lily stared at her with those 2 old eyes. Then she nodded. Sarah got out of the car. The cold hit her like a physical attack, not gradually, not building up, but all at once, a wall of it, every exposed inch of her face burning instantly, her lungs seizing for a second at the first breath. She was wearing 2 coats, her actual coat, and Marcus's old winter jacket over it, plus 2 pairs of socks inside of boots with a sole crack she duct-taped over, plus gloves with the right forefinger missing where the seam had gone. She shoved her bare fingertip into her palm and moved toward the embankment. The wind hit her sideways and she staggered, put one hand out to catch the concrete support column, steadied herself. The ground under her feet was a sheet of black ice covered by 2 inches of new snow, and each step was a small negotiation. She rounded the column and moved up the embankment slope, staying low, using her hands to steady against the ground, the snow biting at her uncovered wrist where the glove pulled back. She heard him before she saw him. A sound, not a cry, not quite, more like a long, low exhale of pain, the kind that comes from somewhere past the ability to scream. And then she came around the concrete support, and she saw the motorcycle first, a massive machine, mostly on its side, 20 feet up the embankment, still ticking and steaming in the cold, one wheel spinning slowly in the wind. Then she saw the man. He was enormous. That was the first thing before the jacket, before the patches, before anything else. The sheer size of him. A man who looked like he'd been built for a different, harder century, 6'3", at least easily 230, and he was lying on his back in the snow with one leg at an angle that didn't look right, and one arm stretched above him, and he was not moving in any coordinated way. Just the small, involuntary trembling that Sarah recognized from watching Lily, and recognized now with a cold drop in her stomach as the beginning of hypothermia. She took 3 more steps toward him, and then she could see the leather vest. Black, heavy, decorated at the collar with pins and patches, sleeves cut off at the shoulders to reveal arms covered in tattoos that ran from wrist to shoulder, in dense, intricate patterns, all of it in stark monochrome against the snow, his skin pale and getting paler. And across the back of the vest, in letters she could read even in the wind, in the dark, because they were white on red and unmistakable. "Hell's Angels." Sarah stopped. Every coherent thought she had organized itself into one clear, precise sentence. "Turn around and walk back to your car." She was a 32-year-old homeless single mother with a 6-year-old daughter asleep in a dead car in a blizzard with one can of soup and $43. She was not equipped to handle this. She had no first aid training, no medical supplies beyond a half-empty box of Band-Aids. She did not know this man. She knew what that patch meant, not from personal experience, but from news stories, from the particular cultural weight of that name, from every instinct she'd spent her whole life developing that said, when you are vulnerable, you do not make yourself more vulnerable by getting involved in things you don't understand. She was standing close enough now to hear his breathing. It was ragged, irregular. Each inhale took visible effort. She looked back at the car. She couldn't see Lily from here, but she could see the back window, faintly the slight fog of condensation that meant Lily's breath was still warming the interior. Her daughter was in there. Her daughter was cold and hungry and 6 years old and depending on her. She looked back at the man. His eyes were open. He was looking at the sky. His lips were moving. She took a step closer because she couldn't help it. Some part of her that predated every rational calculation made her take that step, and she bent slightly to hear what he was saying. And what he was saying very quietly, barely above a breath, was, "Cody, Cody, you gotta..." And then something that broke apart before it became a word. She didn't know who Cody was. She didn't need to. "Hey," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected, scraped raw by the cold. "Hey, can you hear me?" His eyes moved, found her face. There was a moment where he seemed to be deciding whether she was real. "Yeah," he said. The word cost him something. "Can you move? Are any bones broken? I need to know if I can move you." "Leg?" He tried to look down at it and then stopped. Okay, your leg. Anything else? Head, neck?" "I don't neck's okay." He lifted one hand slightly, testing. "Head hurts." "That's going to happen. You went down on black ice." She was already crouching beside him, running her hands along his arms, checking for obvious breaks, the way she'd seen it done in a first aid video online years ago, the only reference point she had. His jacket sleeves were soaked. His skin beneath where she touched his wrist to check his pulse was ice cold. "I need to get you out of the wind. There's an overpass right down this slope. I can't carry you, so I need you to help me. Do you understand?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" he said. "Nobody," she said. "Can you move or not?" He could move. Barely, but enough. It took 11 minutes, she counted, not because she wanted to, but because her brain fixated on numbers when she was scared, turned everything into data. She could manage 11 minutes to get him down the embankment and under the overpass. He kept his weight off the bad leg as much as he could and used her shoulder for the rest, and she was not small. 5'6" and wiry, toughened by 2 months of living rough, but he was enormous. And twice she nearly went down with him on the ice, and twice she caught them both, her hand gripping the concrete column with every ounce of strength she had. When they finally got under the overhang and out of the direct wind, he made a sound she'd never heard a grown man make before and hoped never to hear again. Not a cry, something older than that. "Okay," she said. "Okay, sit here, don't try to stand." He slid down the concrete column to the ground and sat with his back against it, and for a moment he just breathed, and she could see him taking inventory, checking what hurt, what was still functional, what the situation actually was. He was doing what she'd learned to do in the first few weeks of living in the car, assessing, measuring the gap between what he needed and what he had. Sarah crouched in front of him. Up close in the ambient light that filtered down from the highway, she could see him properly for the first time. He was older than she'd thought on the embankment, somewhere around 50, with a gray beard trimmed close to his jaw and gray hair that was pressed flat by sweat and the cold. His face was weathered in the specific way of men who spent most of their time outdoors, deep creased around the eyes, the kind of face that had seen more decades of wind and sun than most. There was a steak along his left cheekbone, not deep but bleeding, and his nose had been broken at some point in the past, healed slightly off-center. He had a presence that she felt even with him sitting on the ground half-conscious, even hurt, even helpless, something that filled the space around him. "What's your name?" she asked. He was quiet for a beat. Then Jack. "Jack? Okay, I'm Sarah." She paused. "My daughter's in that car." She pointed. She wanted him to know. She needed him to know that she wasn't alone, that there was a child here, that the calculus of this situation involved more than just the two of them. "She's 6 years old and she's asleep. I need you to understand that before anything else." He looked at the car, then back at her. Something moved in his eyes, not threat, not calculation, but something she couldn't quite name. Okay, he said, and then, you dragged me down that hill. You would have died up there. Yeah, a pause. Why'd you do that? Sarah sat back on her heels. She'd been moving on instinct and adrenaline for the last 15 minutes, and the question stopped. Her made her actually think about it. And the answer she found when she looked for it was simple and embarrassing and true. I heard what you were saying, she said. You were calling somebody's name. He didn't say anything to that. Are your people coming? She asked. The people you ride with. Do they know where you are? I was ahead of the group, took the wrong exit in the storm. His voice was steadier now that he was out of the wind, but still thin, still working. They'll figure out I'm missing when I don't show at the next stop. Probably another hour before they start backtracking. An hour. She looked at him, his clothes soaked his skin the color of old wax, his breathing still irregular. Hypothermia worked fast, and it had already had 20 minutes with him on that hillside before she got to him. You don't have an hour. He met her eyes. He knew she was right. She could see that he knew. Can you get warm faster than that on your own? She pressed. No. Then you need to come in the car. She stood up. I'm going to wake my daughter and explain what's happening. I need you to understand that she comes first. Whatever I say or do in the next hour, she comes first. Do you understand that? He nodded. Slowly, but he nodded. One more thing, she said, and her voice didn't shake. She made sure of that. She had learned to make her voice not shake for Lily's sake, and it served her now. I know what those patches mean. I know who you are. I don't want any trouble. I don't want anything from you. I'm helping you because... She stopped, looked for the rest of the sentence. Because I couldn't not. But my daughter is in that car, and she is terrified, and she is cold, and she is hungry, and she has already had enough people walk away from her. So you are going to be calm, and you are going to be quiet, and you are going to let me do what I need to do. Are we clear? Jack Sullivan. And she didn't know his last name yet, didn't know what the other bikers called him, didn't know any of the things that would later make the people who heard this story go quiet, with something that wasn't quite disbelief. Jack Sullivan looked at her from the ground with his gray eyes and the rash on his cheekbone and the hypothermia starting to ease its grip, and he said simply, you've got my word. She believed him. She didn't know why, but she believed him, and that frightened her almost as much as the storm. She went to the car. Lily was awake, knees pulled to her chest inside the sleeping bag, eyes enormous. She'd heard the voices. Of course she had. She was 6, not deaf. Mama, she said immediately, who is that man? Sarah got in, pulled the door shut against the wind, and turned to face her daughter. She'd learned early in this particular nightmare that there was no version of the truth too hard to give Lily as long as you gave it carefully. The girl absorbed hard truths the way a sponge absorbed water, completely quickly and without overflow, as long as they came from her mother in a calm voice. There was an accident up on the highway, Sarah said. A man fell off his motorcycle. He was going to freeze to death if I left him up there. Is he hurt? His leg, and he's very cold. He needs to get warm or he's going to get very sick. She paused. I'm going to bring him to the car. He's going to sit in the front seat, and I'm going to run the heater for a few minutes. Lily looked at her. Is he scary? Sarah thought about what to say to that. He's big, she said. He looks scary, but he's hurt, and he's in trouble. And you know what? I've always told you about people who are in trouble. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then carefully, that being in trouble is just being human, that anybody can end up in trouble. That's right. Like us. Like us. Sarah held her daughter's gaze. He said he understood that you come first. He gave his word. Another silence. Then Lily said, okay, Mama. Getting him into the passenger seat was an operation that required the removal of everything that had been living there. 2 bags of clothes, a box of crackers, Sarah's extra coat, a plastic bin with their documents inside, and the cooperation of a man whose coordination was compromised and whose left leg screamed with every movement. He didn't complain. Not once. He moved where she directed him to move, put weight where she told him to put it, and when he finally got himself into the passenger seat and the door closed and the interior of the car blocked the wind, he sat completely still for 10 seconds with his eyes closed. Hi, said Lily from the back seat. He opened his eyes and turned his head carefully and looked at her. Hi, he said. I'm Lily. I'm Jack. Your face is bleeding." He raised his hand and touched the gash on his cheek. "Yeah," he said. "I know." Sarah started the heater. The battery indicator dropped 2 points. She watched it and calculated and decided she had maybe 40 minutes of heater left before the battery was gone, and after that the emergency call was the only option remaining. She set the heat to 68 and angled the vents at Jack and watched his color slowly, painfully begin to return. Lily was watching Jack with the specific, focused attention of a child evaluating an unknown quantity. "Are you one of those motorcycle people?" she asked. "Lily," Sarah started. "Yeah," Jack said. "I am. My teacher says motorcycle people are dangerous." "Lily." "She's not wrong," Jack said. He glanced at Sarah, then back at the girl. "Depends on the motorcycle people." "Are you dangerous?" A pause. "Sometimes." "Are you dangerous right now?" Another pause. Something shifted in his expression, not humor exactly, but close. "No," he said. "Right now I'm just cold." Lily appeared to find this satisfactory. She nodded and pulled the sleeping bag tighter and said, "My mama heats soup on the camp stove, but she can't do it inside because of the carbon monoxide." Jack looked at Sarah. Sarah felt the look land on her like a weight. She knew what he was seeing: the car, the bags, the sleeping bag, the camp stove rolled in, a towel in the back seat, the duct-taped boots, the bare fingertips sticking out of the broken glove. She knew the picture it made. She held his gaze and didn't apologize for it. "How long?" he said. 61 days, she said. He looked at the dashboard, the battery indicator, the thermometer on the visor. "You've got maybe a half hour of heat left," he said, not asking. "I know. Then what? Then I make a decision." She kept her voice flat, matter of fact. This was the voice she'd developed for situations where emotion would cost too much. "We have a can of soup. The camp stove has enough propane for about 4 uses. I'll heat the soup outside. When the heater dies, we'll eat it in here, and we'll bundle up the best we can and wait for morning." In -12, in the car, out of the wind. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Where's your phone?" 11% battery. I'm saving it." "For what?" "For if Lily stops breathing." She said it simply, the way you say things you've already made peace with. "If she stops breathing, I call 911. If she doesn't, I don't call anyone, because if I call anyone tonight, they take her and I don't get her back." The sentence fell into the car like something dropped from a height. Sarah watched Jack's face take it in. She watched him understand not just the logistics, but the specific brutal math of being a homeless parent, the way the system that was supposed to help you could, in one move, help you and destroy you, simultaneously take the thing you loved most in the name of protecting it and leave you with nothing. He was quiet for a long time. "Cody is my son," he said. Sarah hadn't expected that. She looked at him. "What you heard me saying, on the hill." His voice was different now, stripped of the neutral steadiness he had been using, something raw underneath. "He's 24, lives in Milwaukee. We haven't talked in 3 years. He stopped, looked at the windshield. "I was on my way to see him. The chapter had a run through this way, and I thought I'd break off and go see him. Hadn't decided yet. Was still deciding when the ice hit." Sarah didn't say anything. She understood instinctively that this was not a story being offered for sympathy. It was something being said out loud for the first time in a long time, the way things sometimes came loose after a near miss with death. "You were calling his name," she said. "Yeah." A long pause. "Funny what your mind does when it thinks it's over." Lily had fallen back asleep. The sleeping bag rose and fell with her breathing, and the small sounds of the storm outside wrapped around them, and the car's interior had climbed back to 64 degrees, and Jack's color was closer to human again. And Sarah sat in the driver's seat with her hands in her lap and looked at the battery indicator and thought, 20 minutes, maybe 25. She made a decision. She got out of the car, went to the back seat, and pulled out the camp stove and the last propane cartridge and the pot and the can of Campbell's tomato soup. She set up around the corner from the car, using the concrete column as a windbreak, crouching low over the stove with her body blocking the flame. Her hands shook with the cold. It took 3 attempts to get the cartridge connected and the flame going. When it lit, the small blue circle of heat felt like something sacred. She opened the can with the fold-out key on the bottom and poured it into the pot, the red of it vivid against the white snow and the gray concrete, almost absurdly bright. and she set it on the stove and crouched there hunched over it, watching it heat with the specific intensity of someone guarding something precious. The soup was ready in 4 minutes. She poured it into the 2 cups she had, one plastic, one metal, and she picked them up and she stood for a moment in the wind behind the concrete column, holding a cup of tomato soup in each hand, and she thought about Lily asleep in the car. 1 cup for Lily, 1 cup for who, for her, or for the man in the passenger seat who was still cold, still far from safe, whose color had improved, but whose body temperature was still below where it needed to be. The literature on hypothermia, which she'd read on her phone during the early weeks of sleeping in the car, said that warm fluids were critical to recovery, that the body couldn't generate its own heat when the core temperature dropped below a certain point. She looked at both cups. She looked at the car. She already knew what she was going to do. She'd known since she heard his voice on the hillside. She was built this way. She'd understood it about herself at some point in the last 2 months. The way you understand things about yourself when the pretense is gone and only the essential remains. She was built to give what she had. She didn't know if this was a strength or a fatal flaw. Probably it was both. She took both cups back to the car. She gave the metal cup to Jack without a word. He took it and looked at it and looked at her. "That's all of it," he said. "Drink it while it's hot," she said. "Where's yours?" She was already moving to the back seat, slipping in beside Lily, gently working the girl awake. Lily came up from sleep slowly, the way she always did, blinking and soft. And when she saw the cup, she made a small sound of relief, so pure it ached. "Mama, you're not having any?" Lily asked after 3 sips. "I ate earlier," Sarah said. "No, you didn't." "Lily." "Mama." Lily held out the cup. "Here. You need it more than a mama." The word was absolute. 6 years old, and her eyes were absolute. "Take some." Sarah took 2 sips. They burned all the way down, and she felt the warmth hit her empty stomach like a small, brief sun, and she gave the cup back and watched her daughter drink the rest. In the front seat, Jack Sullivan held his cup in both hands and didn't drink immediately. He sat very still. He was listening, Sarah realized, listening to the exchange between mother and daughter, with an expression she couldn't see fully in the dark, but that she felt the weight of. He drank his soup in slow, deliberate sips. When he was done, he set the cup on the dashboard, and he sat very still again, and outside the storm said everything it had to say in the voice of wind and ice and cold. "My crew's gonna come looking," he said finally. "I know. When they find the bike up there." He stopped, started again. "Sarah, when they come, I'm going to tell them everything. About tonight, about you and Lily." He turned in the seat, a slow movement that cost him, and looked at her in the back. "I want you to understand what that means." "I don't want anything," Sarah said immediately. "I don't want—" "I know you don't." His voice was very steady now, very certain, the way voices got when a decision had been made. "That's exactly why I'm telling you." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She wanted to argue. She was good at arguing against things that felt too large, too unearned, too dangerous to believe in. She'd had practice at it. Hope was a heavy thing to carry when you dropped it enough times. But Jack Sullivan looked at her with gray eyes that had nothing left to prove, and outside the storm pressed against the overpass, and inside the car, her daughter slept against her side with soup-warmed breath. And Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, 61 days without a home, $43 to her name, made herself be quiet. She made herself let the words land, and somewhere in the howling dark above them, the engines were already coming. She didn't sleep. Sarah Mitchell had not slept more than 3 consecutive hours on any night in the last 61 days, and tonight was not going to be the exception. She sat in the back seat with Lily pressed against her left side, her daughters breathing slow and deep, and even in that way that only children could manage, full surrender to sleep, even in impossible circumstances. And she watched the storm, and she watched the man in the front seat, and she did the only thing she was any good at anymore, which was think. Jack hadn't slept either. She could tell by the way he held himself, not the loose slack of unconsciousness, but the controlled stillness of a man staying very quiet on purpose, his eyes tracking the windshield, the occasional movement of his hand to his chest where she suspected it hurt to breathe. His color was better. That was real. The soup and the heater had done what they were supposed to do, pulled him back from the edge that hypothermia had been walking him toward, and the gash on his cheek had stopped bleeding. The blood dried to a dark line that Lily had examined with clinical, 6-year-old interest before finally going back to sleep. His leg was still wrong. The angle of it made Sarah's stomach turn when she looked too long, but he wasn't trying to move it, which was the right call. The heater had died 17 minutes ago. She'd watched the battery indicator go all the way to 0 with the specific dread of watching a countdown. She couldn't stop, and when the heat cut off, the cold came back immediately, filling the interior of the car, the way water fills a sinking boat from the edges, first, then everywhere at once. She'd pulled the sleeping bag tighter around Lily and put her own second coat over both of them and sat in the dark counting her daughter's breaths. The temperature inside the car was now 52 degrees. Outside, it was still howling. "How much propane do you have left?" Jack asked. He hadn't moved. "1 or 2 burns," she said. "Maybe 3 small ones." "Save them." "I know. I mean," he stopped, adjusted. "I meant that as information, not an order." "Sorry." Sarah looked at the back of his head. "Okay." A pause, then he said, "You're watching to make sure I don't do something." It wasn't a question, so she didn't treat it like one. "I'm watching because I can't sleep." That's a diplomatic answer. It's also true. The wind hit the car in a gust that made the whole frame shudder, and Lily made a small sound in her sleep and pressed deeper against Sarah's side without waking. Sarah put her arm around her daughter and held on. "You should try to sleep," Jack said. "I'll watch the temperature." "You don't need to do that." "I know I don't need to." A pause. "I'm offering." Sarah considered him, the back of his gray head, the set of his shoulders, the way he said things flatly but without coldness, the specific energy of a man who was used to being in charge of situations and was in this particular situation choosing not to be. She thought about trust. She thought about what trust had cost her in the past. She thought about Lily's breathing. "If it drops below 48, wake me up," she said. 48, he repeated. "Okay." She didn't sleep, but she stopped watching him quite so hard, which was something. Sometime around midnight, she couldn't tell exactly, her phone was off to save the battery. Jack spoke again. Not to her, to the windshield, or to himself, or to nobody in particular. "I had a son who wouldn't eat." Sarah said nothing. Not like a medical thing, more like a protest. His voice was low, careful, like he was testing the weight of each word before he put it down. "He was 14 and he'd decided that eating at the table with me was something he didn't want to do anymore. So he'd make himself a plate and take it to his room. Every night, for about 8 months. A pause. His mother thought it was a phase. Turned out it wasn't. "What was it?" Sarah asked, because the question came out before she could stop it. "It was him telling me he was done trying to get my attention at dinner because I was never actually there." He said it matter-of-factly, with the tone of someone who had processed this information long enough to handle it without bleeding openly. "I was always on the phone, always had something happening with the chapter, always had a reason to be half somewhere else." He paused. "He gave up on me when he was 14. I didn't figure that out until he was 21 and told me directly." Sarah was quiet. 3 years ago, Jack said. "That conversation. Haven't seen him since." "Did you try?" "Twice." A brief flat sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "He lives 20 minutes from the chapter house in Milwaukee. I've been 20 minutes away for 3 years and I've tried twice." He let that sit. "I keep telling myself I'm giving him space, letting him decide when he's ready." He stopped. "Tonight on that hill, when I thought I was done, I wasn't thinking about the chapter, wasn't thinking about the bike or the run or any of it. Just him." Sarah looked at Lily's sleeping face. "She's the whole world," she said, not referencing what he'd said, just saying the thing that was true. "Everything I do, every single calculation I make, it all runs through her first. Sometimes I think I've forgotten what it feels like to want something just for myself." "Does that scare you?" "Sometimes. Mostly it's just how I'm built now." She paused. "What scares me is that she knows. She's 6 and she already knows that she's the thing I'm holding on for. That's a lot of weight for a 6-year-old. Jack turned his head slowly, his neck clearly stiff, and looked at Lily sleeping in the back seat. He looked at her for a long time with an expression Sarah couldn't fully read in the dark. "She told you to take 2 sips of the soup," he said. "She notices everything." "Yeah," he turned back to the windshield. "She does. They sat in silence for a while. The storm pressed against the car. The cold settled deeper. Sarah did the math she always did, temperature time propane battery options, and came up with numbers that were not good but were survivable if nothing else went wrong. Something went wrong at 12:40. She heard it first, a sound beneath the wind, mechanical. Distant but getting closer. Jack heard it at the same time. She could tell because his whole body changed in a way that had nothing to do with his injuries. A sudden shift from stillness to readiness that was so complete and so fast it startled her. "Is that?" she started. "Motorcycles," he said. He was already reaching for the door handle. "Wait." She put her hand out without thinking, almost touched his shoulder, stopped just short. "Your leg." "It's fine." "It is not fine, Sarah." He turned and looked at her, and his voice was not unkind, but it was final. "My people are out in this looking for me. I need them to know where I am." She pulled her hand back. He got the door open, and the cold came in like a flood, and he pulled himself out of the car using the door frame, his bad leg taking none of the weight, and he stood. She could see him from the window, unsteady, one hand on the roof of the car, and he put two fingers in his mouth and produced a whistle, so sharp and loud that Lily jolted awake in the back seat with a gasp. "Mama." "It's okay," Sarah pulled her close. "It's Jack. He's calling his friends." Lily blinked, listened to the sound of the motorcycles growing louder. Now they'd clearly heard the whistle, the engines changing pitch as they slowed and turned. "Are they coming here?" "Yeah. Here." Lily's voice had something complicated in it, not fear exactly, but the specific alertness of a child who'd learned that the arrival of strangers did not automatically mean safety. "I'm right here," Sarah said. "I'm not going anywhere." There were three of them. She could hear that before she could see them, three engines slowing to a stop somewhere just past the overpass, then the sounds of boots on frozen ground, voices she couldn't make out over the wind, and then Jack's voice carrying back clearer, now his strength coming back with his people nearby. She caught fragments. He was all right. Ice on the upper ramp. His leg needed looking at. Everyone stopped crowding him. Then the door on the passenger side opened, and a man looked in. He was younger than Jack by maybe 15 years, built similarly but rangier, with a dark beard and eyes that moved quickly over the interior of the car, Sarah, Lily, the bags, the sleeping bag, the camp stove, and processed all of it in about 3 seconds with an expression that was hard to read but not hostile. "You the one who pulled him down the embankment," he said. "Yes," Sarah said. He looked at her for another moment, then he looked at Lily. "Hey," he said to Lily. His voice changed completely, not softer exactly, but directed differently, aimed at a child and adjusted accordingly. "You doing okay?" Lily considered him with her serious eyes. "We're cold," she said. "Yeah." He looked back at Sarah. "We've got gear on the bikes, sleeping bags, hand warmers, emergency blankets." "Can I?" He stopped. Started differently. "I'm going to get some things. For the cold, okay?" Sarah looked at him. She looked at the patch on his vest. "What's your name?" she asked. "Danny." "Danny." She held his gaze. "My daughter comes first." "Ma'am," he said, and it wasn't sarcastic, it was just the simplest possible acknowledgement. "I got a daughter too. She's 8. I know exactly what you mean." He disappeared. A minute later, he was back with an armful of gear, 2 sleeping bags still in their compression bags, a fistful of hand warmers, a foil emergency blanket that crinkled loudly when he shook it out. He passed them through the car door without climbing in, without making himself at home in her space, and Sarah took them with hands that had gone clumsy with cold and relief. She cracked 2 hand warmers and put them in Lily's hands immediately. Lily made a sound so raw and grateful it cracked something in Sarah's chest. "Thank you," Sarah said to Danny. "Don't," he said. Then, "I mean, you dragged my president down a hill in a blizzard. We're not exactly even." President. So Jack wasn't just a member. She filed that away without comment. Outside, she could hear the other men working there were more. Now she realized more than 3. She could hear additional engines cutting off and footsteps and voices, the systematic sounds of people who were used to handling situations. Someone was looking at Jack's leg. She heard Jack say something sharp and dismissive. Heard another voice insist, heard the first voice eventually give way. Danny was still crouching in the open door. "He's going to need a hospital," he said quietly to Sarah. "The leg. We've got a guy who knows first aid, but this needs an x-ray. Okay, Sarah said. We're going to get him loaded and take him in. He paused. Are you going to be okay here? The question landed differently than he'd probably intended it. It landed with all the weight of everything he could see, the dead car, the sleeping bags, the broken glove, the camp stove, and Sarah felt the familiar complex surge of shame and pride that had been her constant companion for 61 days, the war between I don't need anything from anyone and I need everything from everyone, and the exhausting effort of holding those two truths simultaneously. We'll be fine, she said, her default answer. Danny looked at her. He didn't argue with her. He didn't push. He just looked at her for a moment with something in his expression that she couldn't categorize, and then he nodded and started to pull the door closed. Wait, she said. He stopped. She didn't know why she said the next thing. She'd spent 61 days not saying it, not to shelter workers, not to the gas station attendant who'd given her free coffee twice, not to the library caseworker who'd noticed and offered pamphlets she already had. She'd spent 61 days protecting herself from the specific vulnerability of being seen by people who might see and then leave. I'm scared, she said. The words sat there between them. I know, he said. Simple. Direct. I can see that you are. She was shivering for 3 hours. I kept watching her hands, the color of her fingers. Her voice was steady, but it cost her. I've been watching her fingers for 2 months, every night. Danny said nothing. He let her talk. I have $43, Sarah said. I have 11% battery on my phone and 1 burn left on the camp stove. The battery in this car is dead and has been dead for 4 days. I have been keeping her alive with sleeping bags and soup and library hours, and I'm running out of ways to, she stopped, pressed her lips together, breathed. I'm not asking you for anything. I want you to know that. I'm not telling you this because I expect anything. I'm telling you because I haven't told anyone, and I think if I don't say it out loud to someone tonight, I'm going to, she stopped again. Lily was watching her mother with those old, careful eyes. You're going to what? Danny asked, quietly. I don't know, Sarah said. Something I can't afford to do. Danny sat with that for a moment. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He pulled the passenger door all the way open and sat in the passenger seat, not taking over the space, just sitting in it, leaning his forearms on his knees, making himself smaller. Somehow the way men his size rarely thought to do. Tell me what 60 days looks like, he said. Tell me what you actually need. She looked at him. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on her. She was sitting in a dead car under a highway overpass in a blizzard with a Hell's Angel asking her what she needed, and her daughter was watching with hand warmers clasped between her palms. And 3 months ago, she'd been a waitress with a lease and a savings account with $800 in it, in a future that looked like most futures, uncertain but navigable. She told him anyway. Not everything, not all 61 days, but the architecture of it, the eviction, the shelter wait list, the diner that had cut her hours when she needed to stay home with a sick Lily, and then cut her completely. 2 weeks later, the $43, the dead transmission, the camp stove, the library hours, the caseworker named Denise, who was kind and overwhelmed, and whose waiting list said mid-February. Danny listened. He didn't say anything while she talked. He didn't offer solutions or platitudes or the particular brand of well-meaning advice that people gave when they were uncomfortable with a problem they couldn't fix. He just listened, and the listening itself was something she hadn't expected to need so badly. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Okay. Yeah. He stood up from the seat. Okay, I hear you. He looked at Lily. You want another hand warmer, kid? Lily looked at her mother. Sarah nodded. Yes, please, Lily said. Danny passed her one, then he looked at Sarah again with an expression she still couldn't entirely decode. Not pity, something more serious than that, something with calculation in it, the way people looked when they were adding things up. Jack's gonna know I want to talk to you before we move him, he said. Can you come out for a minute? Lily. I'll stay right here, Lily said immediately. She held up her hand warmers. I'm warm. I'm okay. Sarah looked at her daughter. Lily looked back with that specific steadiness that was both the most reassuring thing she'd ever seen and the most heartbreaking. 2 minutes, Sarah said. Outside, the wind had eased marginally, still brutal but less savage. The gusts spaced farther apart, as if the storm was catching its breath. There were 5 bikers now. She counted 5 men in leather vests moving with the organized efficiency of people who were used to handling emergencies together. 2 of them were doing something to Jack's legs. She could see Jack sitting on a folded sleeping bag against the concrete column, watching the men work on him with the expression of someone enduring necessary pain and not making a scene about it. There was a large motorcycle stopped nearby with its engine running and its heat creating a small, warm radius. Jack saw her and gestured her over. She crossed to him. Up close, he looked better and worse simultaneously. Better color, steadier eyes, but the pain from his leg was evident in the set of his jaw and the careful way he held his whole body. "Danny said you need to talk to me," she said. "I need to ask you something." He looked up at her from the ground and his voice was low just for her. "Straight answer. You don't have to be polite about it." "Okay. When we leave tonight, when we take him," he nodded toward the bike. "Where do you go?" "Back in the car. In 40 degrees and dropping." "Yes." "With Lily." "Yes." She kept her voice level. "That's the plan. That's what's available." He looked at her for a long time. "Then there's a motel 4 miles east, the Route 9 Motor Lodge. It's a nothing place, but it's heated and it's $38 a night." He paused. "I know you said $43. Sarah said nothing. She could feel where this was going and her whole body tensed against it, that specific tension of someone bracing for charity for the particular interaction that always felt like giving away something she needed to keep. "I'm not offering you money," he said, reading her somehow. "I'm telling you a fact. You have $43. A room is $38. That leaves you $5 and a warm bed for Lily." He held her gaze. "That's a math problem, not a gift. You can do that yourself with what you already have." She stared at him. He was right. She'd known about the motor lodge. She'd driven past it before the car died. She'd done that exact math once and then abandoned it because $38 was $38, and after that she'd have $5 for food and 2 people, and no clear next step, and the risk of being worse off than before had felt too high. But tonight the calculus had changed. Lily's fingers, the temperature dropping, the hand warmers that would last 4 hours at most, the camp stove with 1 burn left, 52 degrees inside the car, and dropping. "I wasn't going to spend the last of my money on a room I couldn't afford to sleep in more than 1 night," she said, explaining it to herself as much as to him. "1 warm night can change the math on the next day," Jack said. "You know that." She did know that. She just hadn't let herself know it. She stood there in the cold doing the calculation, the real one, not the frightened one. A warm night, a warm shower maybe. Lily sleeping on a bed, a real mattress, waking up warm and rested. A different brain in the morning, a warmer body, $5, and a clear head, and daylight. "Okay," she said. It came out quieter than she meant it to. Jack nodded. Then he looked past her at Danny, who was standing a few feet away, close enough to have heard, far enough to be politely pretending he hadn't, and Jack said, "Danny, get her car started." "It's dead," Sarah said immediately. "The battery." "We have a jump kit on Big Mike's bike," Danny said. He said it matter-of-factly, already moving. "And the transmission, where's it slipping?" Danny stopped, turned. "Everywhere. It's been going since November." Danny looked at one of the other men, the one they called Big Mike, apparently a man who was somehow even larger than Jack and who had the quiet, capable air of someone who fixed things for a living. The 2 of them had a brief exchange that Sarah was too far away to hear. "He can nurse it," Danny said, coming back. "Can't promise anything on the highway, but 4 miles, yeah." Sarah looked at Jack. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "I don't want—" "Sarah." His voice was quiet and certain and entirely without performance. "You gave my life back tonight. You gave my daughter, you gave Lily. Sorry, you gave her your half of the only food you had." He stopped, corrected himself. "You gave me your half of the only food you had. You brought me in from the cold when every reasonable thought you had told you not to." He held her gaze. "Let us get your car started. Let us follow you to the motel and make sure you get there. Then we'll leave you alone. That's all." She wanted to say no. The word was right there, the automatic armor of it shaped and ready. She looked at Lily through the car window. Lily was watching her with hand warmers pressed between her palms and eyes that were patient and trusting and 6 years old. "Okay," Sarah said. Big Mike got the car started in 11 minutes. The jump kit worked on the third try, the Chevy coughing and shaking before it caught the engine running. Rough, but running. The heater came on when Sarah turned it up, blowing cold at first, and then grudgingly warm. Lily pressed both hands to the nearest vent and made a sound of pure, unfiltered joy that Sarah felt from the back of her skull to the soles of her feet. Warm, Lily said. Mama, it's warm. I know, baby. Sarah put her hand over Lily's. I know. They formed an informal convoy, Sarah's limping Chevy in the middle, Danny on his bike in front, and Big Mike behind the other three bikers, having gone ahead with Jack in whatever vehicle they'd arranged for a man who couldn't sit a motorcycle. The 4 miles to the Route 9 Motor Lodge took 12 minutes because Sarah kept the speed at 25, nursing the transmission the way Big Mike had told her to, gentle on the acceleration, easy on the brakes. The motel was a single-story, L-shaped building with a lit sign missing 2 letters, the kind of place that had been there since the 50s and had long since stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was, a row of heated rooms with functional beds and working locks, the kind of place that took cash without questions. Sarah had driven past it 40 times. She'd never let herself look at it too long. She parked in front of the office and sat for a moment. We're staying here tonight, Lily asked. Yes. Lily looked at the motel with the evaluative expression she brought to most new situations. Does it have a bed? It has a bed. A real one. A real one. Lily nodded with the authority of someone finalizing a decision. Okay. Danny was at the office door by the time Sarah got out. He wasn't going in. He was just standing there, hands in his jacket pockets, making sure she got there. The desk clerk was a heavy-set woman in her 60s who looked up from a small television when Sarah pushed the door open, and who, to her eternal credit, looked at Sarah, the 2 coats, the duct-tape boots, the child on her hip, with absolutely no expression of anything but professional neutrality. Single room, the woman said. Yes, how much? 36 with the winter rate. She glanced at Lily. Family rate's 28, but that's supposed to be 2 adults. Sarah looked at the woman. The woman looked at Lily. 28, the woman said. Family rate. Sarah counted out $28 in cash, handed it over, received a key on a plastic fob, and walked out of the office with $15 in her pocket. 15, not 5, because the woman had quietly adjusted the rate and her daughter's hand in hers, and a door number and a working heater waiting. She turned to thank Danny. He was gone. His bike was gone. Big Mike was gone. The parking lot held only her car and the quiet aftermath of engines that had moved on. She stood there in the cold for a moment, looking at the empty lot. Then Lily tugged her hand. Mama, come inside. It's warm inside. Room 7 was small and smelled like industrial cleaning products and had a heating unit under the window that produced a steady, reliable, beautiful warmth from the moment Sarah clicked it on. The bed was a queen one bed, which was fine, which was better than fine, with a comforter that had seen better days, but was thick and whole. There was a bathroom with actual hot water that Lily discovered by turning on the shower and then screaming with delight at the steam. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and watched her daughter stand in the bathroom doorway holding her hand under the stream of hot water with an expression of absolute wonder, and something inside Sarah Mitchell cracked open along a seam she hadn't known was there. She didn't cry. She wasn't built for crying in front of Lily, had learned to hold it for later, for showers, for the 20 minutes when Lily was asleep and the car was quiet. But something came loose that she couldn't name, some knot of sustained, compressed fear that had been holding everything together for 61 days, and for a moment she just sat on the edge of that bed, in that small, unremarkable room, and breathed. Mama, Lily said from the doorway. Yeah. Can I take a shower? Yeah, baby. Go ahead. She listened to Lily in the shower, the sound of her daughter singing the boat song under the hot water, the particular happy chaos of a 6-year-old thoroughly enjoying something, and she took off her boots and sat on the bed and did the math one more time. 15 more. 1 room paid through morning, a car with a battery that would die again as soon as they drove anywhere. A caseworker named Denise with a waiting list that said mid-February. Tomorrow, what was tomorrow? Thursday. She'd left the diner on a Thursday. She'd been sitting in this exact thought loop, this exact inventory of insufficient resources for 61 consecutive days. But tonight, Lily was warm. Tonight, Lily was singing in a shower. That was real. Whatever tomorrow brought, that was real. She picked up her phone and turned it on to check the time. The screen said 1:47 a.m., and then it showed something that made her go very still. A text message from a number she didn't recognize sent while the phone had been off. She opened it. It said, "This is Jack Sullivan. Danny got your number off the registration in your glove box. Hope that's okay. I wanted you to know we haven't forgotten. Get some sleep." She read it twice. Then she read it a third time, not because she didn't understand it, but because she was trying to determine what to do with it, what it meant, what it required of her, whether to respond or whether to let it sit and protect herself from whatever it was promising. She had learned in 61 days that promises came in two kinds: the kind people made from a place of real intention and the kind they made from a place of relief. Relief that the uncomfortable situation was resolved, that they had done the thing that they could now return to their own lives with the comfort of having helped. The second kind evaporated by morning. She'd seen it happen. She knew the texture of it, but she looked at the message again. We haven't forgotten. Not I won't forget. Not I'll see what I can do. We haven't forgotten. Present tense, collective. She typed back, "Thank you for tonight. I mean that." She turned the phone off before he could respond because she needed to manage her own hope in careful doses. Then she lay back on the bed, still in her clothes, and stared at the ceiling and listened to Lily singing and let herself, just for a moment, consider the possibility that the worst night had not ended in the worst way. Lily came out of the shower in her pajamas, hair damp, cheeks pink, and climbed onto the bed with the solemnity of someone completing a ceremony. "It's the warmest shower I ever had," Lily announced. "I think you might be exaggerating." "I'm not. It was perfect." She wiggled under the comforter and sighed that specific boneless sigh of total physical comfort and looked up at the ceiling with her damp hair spread on the pillow. "Mama." "Yeah, Jack's nice." Sarah turned her head to look at her daughter. "He is," she agreed. "He was scared on the hill, but he wasn't scared of us." "No, he wasn't." Lily thought about this for a moment. "Do you think he's going to be okay?" "His leg." "Yeah, I think his people will take care of him." "Do you think he'll call Cody?" Sarah went still. She hadn't said Cody's name in front of Lily. She'd been in the front seat when Jack said it. She'd thought Lily was asleep. "You heard that," Sarah said. "I hear most things," Lily said without apology. Sarah looked at the ceiling. "I think, yeah. I think tonight might be the night he decides to." Lily nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already worked out. "Good," she said, then Mama. "Yeah, I'm glad you went to look." Sarah felt the sentence land somewhere deep. "Me too," she said, "even though we had to give him the soup." Even though. Lily turned on her side and pulled the comforter to her chin and closed her eyes. Within 90 seconds, her breathing had deepened into sleep, the complete trusting sleep of a child who felt safe and who hadn't felt safe in a very long time and who had found it in a room that smelled like cleaning products in a motel with 2 missing letters on its sign on a night that had almost killed 2 people. Sarah Mitchell lay in the dark and breathed. Outside, the storm was still going. She could hear it muffled now by walls and glass and insulation, no longer the full-body assault of the overpass, but present still there, the world still hard outside this specific rectangle of warmth they'd found themselves in. She thought about Jack Sullivan's gray eyes on the hillside when he'd realized she was real. She thought about the way Danny had sat in the passenger seat and listened without fixing. She thought about the desk clerk who changed the rate without being asked and without making it a moment. She thought about the text message. Present tense. Collective. She turned it over and over and she felt the old armor going up, the reasonable defensive protective armor she'd built over 61 days, and she felt something pushing back against it from the other side, something she hadn't had much use for lately. She was almost asleep when her phone vibrated. She hadn't turned it all the way off. The battery indicator said 8%. A new message from Jack's number. She opened it. It said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts early." She stared at that for a long time. Tomorrow starts early. Not tomorrow is another day. Not hang in there. Not we'll figure something out, maybe probably we'll see. Tomorrow starts early, as if he already knew what tomorrow was going to look like, as if there was a plan already in motion that she hadn't been told about yet. She turned the phone face down on the nightstand. She pulled the comforter up. She listened to her daughter's breathing. And for the first time in 61 days, Sarah Mitchell fell asleep before midnight. She did not know as she slept what was happening 40 miles north of that motel room. She did not know about the calls being made, the texts going out, the group chats lighting up with information, moving at the speed of a network that had been built over decades and maintained with the specific loyalty of people who understood what it meant to leave no one behind. She did not know about the maps being looked at, the phone numbers being tracked down, the quiet, authoritative voice of Jack Sullivan calling from a hospital waiting room with his leg being evaluated down the hall, telling his people what he'd seen under that overpass. She didn't know any of it, but in the morning she would. Part 3 lưu ý viết 5.300 từ liên kết liên mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện pha hội thoại, tạo thành một câu chuyện liên mạch khi ghép lại. Mỗi phần liên mạch với phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. Liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liên mạch. Sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đau dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ phong cách. Kể chuyện Mỹ Hoa Kỳ giống văn giàu cảm xúc chân thực và gần gũi, không mô tả cảnh, tập trung vào hành động, cảm xúc và tâm lý nhân vật. Viết phần 2 đặc điểm 10/10 và bổ sung tiết tấu câu chuyện nhanh, sửa lỗi AI. Kể theo ngôi thứ 3 tăng độ kịch tính, không viết lân man. Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau. Lưu ý trả lời trong một tin nhắn, không nhảy sang mức document mới. 2 đến 3 phút cần có mini climax và đạt 10 đến 15 mini climax. Mỗi phần cứ 10 đến 12 phút có một twist lớn sâu sắc đan xen mini cliffhanger mạnh hơn, tăng tính tự nhiên cho phản ứng của các nhân vật. Thêm nhịp điệu kịch tính thực tế và gần gũi. Mỗi 8 đến 10 phút cần có móc giữ chân khán giả. Lưu ý không mô tả cảnh và chỉ cần viết nội dung và viết đúng lệnh nhé. Show More 0935 Part 3. What Morning Brings. She woke up because Lily was sitting cross-legged on the bed staring at her. Not crying, not shaking, not cold, just sitting there in the gray morning light with her damp hair from last night, still slightly crimped at the ends, holding both hand warmers, even though they'd long since gone cold, watching Sarah's face the way she always did when she was waiting for her mother to come back from wherever sleep had taken her. Morning, Lily said. Sarah's first breath was automatic, the sharp intake of someone whose body expected cold and found warmth. Instead, the specific disorientation of waking up somewhere that didn't require immediate damage assessment. She lay still for 3 full seconds, letting her brain catch up to her body, letting the room come into focus. The heater humming under the window, the comforter thick and real, the ceiling that was not the roof of a dead Chevy. Morning, she said. It's 7:14, Lily reported. I watched the clock. Did you sleep? A lot. Lily said this with a kind of reverent satisfaction, the way people talked about meals they'd eaten after a long hunger. I didn't wake up once. She paused. Did you? Once. Around 4. She'd woken at 4 to the sound of a truck on the highway and lain in the dark for 15 minutes, listening to the wind before sleep had come back and taken her again. You were out cold. My whole body feels different, Lily said thoughtfully. Like it got fixed. Sarah sat up and looked at her daughter, truly looked in real light the way she hadn't been able to do for weeks in the dark of the car. Lily's cheeks had color in them. Not the feverish, high color of cold stress, but real color, the warm pink of a child who had slept 8 hours on a real mattress. Her eyes were clear. Her lips were not blue at the edges. Something unknotted in Sarah's chest so completely that she had to look away. Okay, she said mostly to herself. Okay. She had $15. She had a phone at 6% battery. She had a car with a jumped battery that would probably die again and a transmission that was living on borrowed time. She had Denise at the Family Crisis Center, whose waiting list said mid-February, and it was currently February 3rd. She had 11 days to close a gap that didn't close. But she had $15 in a warm morning, and Lily's cheeks were pink, and she was going to start from there. She turned her phone on. 4% now. The charging cable was in the car, which meant she needed to get to the car. She looked at the messages, first one from an unknown contact she hadn't seen yet, added sometime early this morning, sent at 5:52 a.m. She opened it. It was from a number she didn't have saved with the name typed in the first line. This is Danny Reeves. Jack gave me your number. I'm going to be in the motel parking lot at 8 o'clock. I have coffee. Don't argue about it. Sarah read the message twice. Then she looked at the clock on the nightstand. 7:22, 38 minutes. She got up, used the bathroom, pulled her hair back, assessed herself in the mirror with the clinical detachment she developed for situations where she didn't have the option of caring too much about appearances. 2 months of living in a car had changed her face in ways she couldn't entirely account for, not dramatically, not the way hard living changed people in movies, but quietly a sharpening around the eyes and jaw, a particular kind of watchfulness that hadn't been there before. She looked like a woman who had been solving problems continuously for 60 days and had not yet been allowed to stop. She went back out and helped Lily into her clean outfit, the one from the garbage bag in the trunk, jeans and a thermal undershirt, and a sweater that was slightly too small but still serviceable. And she tied Lily's shoes and smoothed down her hair and said, "We're going to go meet someone in the parking lot in a few minutes." "Danny," Lily said. Sarah looked at her. "How do you know about Danny?" "You were asleep when you got the message, but your phone made the sound, and I read it." She said this without guilt. "Is that bad?" "We're going to talk about privacy later," Sarah said. "Yes, Danny." "He has coffee," Lily said. "I know." "Can I have some?" "No." "What about hot chocolate?" Danny didn't mention hot chocolate. "Maybe he has some anyway." Sarah almost smiled. It surprised her, the almost smile, the specific lightness of it coming from somewhere she thought had gone dormant. Danny was in the parking lot at 7:58, which told her he'd been waiting since before he said he would be. He was in a pickup truck, not a bike, in deference to the ice still on the roads, and when she came out with Lily, he got out and handed her a coffee, large black with a sleeve of sugar packets on top. And then he crouched down and handed Lily a gas station hot chocolate in a paper cup with a plastic lid, and a look on his face that said this had not been a coincidence. Lily looked at the cup, then at Sarah. "Don't say I told you so," Sarah said. Lily took the cup with enormous dignity. Danny straightened up and stood in the cold, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and looked at Sarah. "How's the leg?" Sarah asked. "Not mine to report on. Jack's." He paused. "Fractured fibula. Clean break, not displaced. They're putting a boot on it this morning. He'll be out of the hospital by noon." "Okay." She took a sip of coffee. It hit her empty stomach like something medicinal and necessary. "Danny, why are you here?" He looked at her steadily. "Because Jack asked me to be." "Why did Jack ask you to be?" "Because he wants to know your situation. The full picture." He paused. "He wants to help." There it was. The word she'd been bracing for since the text message last night. Not an offer yet, just the approach to one, the sound of something large and well-intentioned moving in her direction. "I told him the situation last night," she said. "He knows. He wants to understand what actually fixing it looks like, not a night at a motel." He held her gaze. The whole problem. Housing, the car, the caseworker, the money, all of it. Sarah stood in the cold parking lot with her coffee, and she felt the armor going up, and she felt simultaneously something she could only describe as exhaustion. With the armor, a bone-deep tiredness. With the work of protecting herself from things that wanted to help her, the sheer energy cost of maintaining that defense when she had no energy left to spare. "It's complicated," she said. "I know it's complicated. Jack knows it's complicated." Danny glanced at Lily, who was examining her hot chocolate lid with scientific interest, and then back at Sarah. "You pulled our president off a hill in a blizzard and gave him the last food you had. The chapter wants to return that. Not symbolically, actually. I don't want the chapter's charity. It's not charity." He said it without heat, just as fact. "Charity is what you give strangers when you feel sorry for them. This is what you give someone who did something real." "There's a difference." He paused. "Let me ask you one question. Straight answer." "Okay. If the car were running and you had first month and deposit on a decent apartment, and Lily had a pediatrician appointment, and you had a job lead, would you be able to do the rest yourself?" Sarah looked at him. "Yes," she said. The word came out with a certainty that surprised even her. "That's what I thought." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a notebook, an actual spiral notebook, small, the kind you bought in a drugstore for $1 and a pen. "So tell me what those pieces look like. Specifically, best case version. What does fixed actually mean?" She stared at him. He looked back, pen ready, completely serious. She sat down on the hood of her car. She took another sip of coffee. She made herself think, not the frightened thinking she'd been doing for 60 days, the survival calculus, but the other kind. The kind she'd been too exhausted and too scared to do, the kind that started from what she actually needed instead of what she could scrape together. She talked for 20 minutes. He wrote everything down. When she was done, he looked at his notes. He didn't say anything for a moment, just read back through what he'd written with the concentrated attention of someone taking inventory. "Okay," he said. Okay. He put the notebook away. "I'll be back in an hour. Check out of the room at 11, but don't go anywhere after that." "Danny," he looked at her. She stopped. She'd been about to say, "Don't make promises. Don't tell her things that were going to dissolve in daylight. Don't be the second kind of promise." But he was already getting back in the truck, and there was something about the way he moved efficient, no wasted motion, the body language of someone with a list and the means to work through it that made the warning feel unnecessary. She watched him pull out of the lot. Lily materialized at her elbow. "He wrote things down," she said. "He did. That means he's serious." "Where did you get that from?" Lily considered. "People who aren't serious don't write things down." Sarah looked at her daughter, 6 years old, with divinity school wisdom and a mostly empty hot chocolate. "Come on," Sarah said. "Let's get the charging cable from the car." The next hour was the strangest of Sarah Mitchell's 62 days without a home. She sat in room 7 of the Route 9 Motor Lodge with her phone charging, and Lily on the bed watching the small wall-mounted television cartoons, the first cartoon she'd seen in weeks, her face arranged in the specific bliss of a child receiving something ordinary and miraculous at the same time, and Sarah sat in the chair by the window and waited. She was good at waiting, she'd learned. But this waiting felt different from the kind she'd done in the car. It wasn't the waiting of someone with no options. It was the waiting of someone who had handed information to another person and was now genuinely uncertain what would come back. Her phone buzzed at 9:17. Jack Sullivan. She answered before she could think about it. "How's the leg?" she said. "Inconvenient." His voice was clear, none of the hypothermia roughness from last night, back to the flat, certainty she'd heard through the car window when he'd been talking to his crew. "Boot for 6 weeks. I've had worse." A pause. "How are you? How's Lily?" "We slept," she said. It came out with more weight than she intended. A brief silence. He understood the weight of it. "Good. Danny was here." "I know, he texted me." He took notes. "Danny's thorough. It's why I sent him." He paused. "Sarah, I want to talk to you about what we're going to do, but I want to ask you something first. Same as Danny asked you. He told you what I said?" "He told me you said yes without hesitating." That was enough. She could hear the controlled environment of a hospital room behind him, the ambient machinery, the distant voice on a PA. "I want you to answer one more question." "Okay. Do you trust me?" The question was so direct and so unexpected that she had no prepared response for it. She sat in the chair by the window with the morning light coming through the curtain and the sound of cartoons behind her, and she actually thought about it. Not the defensive automatic, no, not the eager automatic, yes, but the real answer. "I trusted you last night," she said finally, "at the overpass. I don't know why. Because I gave you my word and you believed it." "Yes. I'm giving it again now." His voice was unhurried. "Whatever we do for you and Lily, I need it to be sustainable. Not a one-night fix. I've seen that kind of help before. It doesn't hold." A pause. "What Danny wrote down, I've been on the phone since 6 this morning, working through it. I'm going to tell you what's possible. Then you're going to tell me what you're comfortable with. No pressure, no conditions. You drive this." She pressed her hand flat on her thigh to keep it still. "Tell me," she said. He talked for 14 minutes. She listened without interrupting, which was not easy because what he was describing was not what she'd expected. Not a charity drive or a collection passed around a chapter meeting, not a check that would cover 2 months and then leave her exactly where she'd started. What he was describing was systematic. It had pieces, it fit together. There was a chapter member, retired contractor, who had been looking for a project. There was a lot in Millhaven that the chapter owned outright, bought 3 years ago for a reason that hadn't materialized, sitting empty, fully permitted utilities to the street. There was the chapter's legal contact who knew the county housing authority well enough to make calls that moved faster than a waiting list. There was a food network the chapter supported, a medical clinic where the chapter did volunteer work, a job placement contact at a manufacturing firm in Millhaven who owed the chapter a favor. And there were people. A lot of people. The kind of people who responded to a call from Jack Sullivan at 6 in the morning without asking too many questions. When he finished, the silence lasted almost 10 seconds. "Jack," she said. "Yeah." "Why?" She heard him breathe. "Because you handed me everything you had," he said. "Because your daughter told you to take 2 sips of the soup and you listened to King. Because you told me your daughter comes first, and then you proved it, and then you also saved my life. And those things happened in the same night, and that means something." He paused. "And because I spent the last 3 years telling myself I was a man who paid his debts, and then last night I realized I might be a man who just said that about himself." She didn't know what to do with that. She held it carefully. "I want to meet with you," she said, "in person, before anything happens." "That's fair. I want to understand who's involved and what their actual commitment looks like, not what they're willing to do in theory." "Also fair. And I want it in writing, whatever's agreed to. I want documentation." A pause, then something that might in another man have been a laugh. "Smart. I've learned to be." "I know you have." Another pause. "Danny's going to come back at 11. I'll be there by noon. Can you stay in the room?" She thought about the checkout, thought about the $15. "I need to talk to the front desk about—" "Already handled," Jack said. She stopped. "The room is covered through Friday," he said. "Before you argue, it's not charity, it's logistics. We need you in one place for the next few days while things are being arranged. Consider it operational." He said the last word dryly. She almost laughed. It startled her, the almost laugh coming from the same place the almost smile had come from this morning, something in her coming back to life in increments. "Operational," she repeated. "That's the word I'd use." "Okay," she said. "Noon." She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap and stared at the middle distance for a moment, trying to organize what she felt into something manageable. It wasn't working. The feelings were too large and too numerous and too contradictory. Hope and fear and suspicion and gratitude and the particular vertigo of someone who has been in free fall long enough that the sensation of something stopping the fall feels wrong. Lily had muted the cartoons at some point and was watching her. "Mama," she said. "What did he say?" Sarah looked at her daughter, at the pink cheeks and the clear eyes and the gap between her front teeth and the too small sweater. "He said he's coming at noon," Sarah said, "to talk. About helping us, about what helping us actually looks like." Lily tilted her head. "Is it going to be okay?" Sarah opened her mouth to give the careful answer, the one she'd been giving for 62 days, the small true thing inside the larger unknown. Then she stopped. She thought about what she actually believed separate from what she could prove separate from what was safe to hope for. "Yeah," she said, "I think it might actually be okay." Lily looked at her for a moment, reading her face the way she always did, checking the answer against the expression. Then she unmuted the cartoons. Danny came back at 10:58. He was not alone. There were 3 vehicles in the parking lot when Sarah looked out the window, Danny's truck and 2 others and 6 men in Hells Angels vests, standing in the cold with the organized patience of people used to waiting for instructions. Danny knocked on the door, and when Sarah opened it, he handed her a bag from a diner 2 miles east, eggs toast, hash browns, orange juice for Lily, and said, before anything else. Sarah looked at the food and looked at him. "Eat," he said. "Both of you, then we'll talk." She fed Lily at the small table by the window, watching the men in the parking lot. They weren't doing anything threatening, weren't pacing, weren't talking loudly, weren't making themselves a presence in the aggressive way she'd half expected. They were standing around in the cold the way men stood around in parking lots everywhere, shifting their weight, checking their phones. One of them apparently telling the other something that made 2 of them laugh. They looked ordinary. They looked like men waiting for a task. This was somehow more disorienting than if they'd looked dangerous. "How many are there?" Lily asked, mouthful of hash brown. "6 that I can see." "Why are they here?" "I'm about to find out." Jack Sullivan arrived at 12:03 in a pickup driven by Big Mike, the fractured fibula in a walking boot, that he moved with careful deliberateness as he crossed the parking lot. He was in the same vest, cleaned up the wash on his cheek, butterfly taped closed, and he looked like himself, which meant he looked like a man that a room reorganized itself around without being asked. He knocked on the door. Sarah opened it. They looked at each other for a moment. "How's your leg?" she said. "How's Lily?" he said. "She ate eggs." "Good." He looked past her at Lily on the bed, who waved with the casual confidence of someone greeting an expected guest. He raised a hand back. Then he looked at Sarah. "Can we sit?" He took the chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed. He had a folder, actual manila folder, which surprised her documents inside, and he put it on his knee and didn't open it immediately, just looked at her. "I want to tell you what I've put together," he said, "and then I want you to tell me what you think." "Okay." "The lot on Deering Street, you know, Millhaven." "Some, Dom." "Quiet block residential 2 miles from the elementary school. Lot's been cleared and graded. Utilities are already run. The chapter bought it in 2021 for a build that didn't happen." He paused. "We're going to build a house on it." Sarah kept her face still. "It'll take 4 to 6 weeks with the crew I have," he continued. "Chapter's got 3 licensed contractors, 2 electricians, and a plumber who'll work the project. Materials will run about $60,000. Chapter fund covers it." He said the number flatly, not as a performance. "The house will be in your name. Full title transfer, no lien, no conditions. You'll own it." The room was very quiet. "That's..." She stopped, started again. "Jack, that's a house." "I know what it is." "You can't..." "Sarah." His voice was not unkind, but it was absolute. "I've had this conversation with myself for 6 hours already. Don't make me have it with you too." He held her gaze. "You gave me everything you had. This is what everything looks like on the other end of the scale." She pressed both hands flat on her thighs. She breathed through her nose. She kept her face still because Lily was watching, and because if she let her face go, she would lose the thread of this conversation entirely. "Keep going," she said. He opened the folder. The car, a chapter member, ran an auto shop 15 miles east. The Chevy was beyond saving. He'd already had someone look at it this morning while Sarah slept, a drive-by assessment of the transmission and the battery situation. But the shop had a 2018 Honda Accord, 110,000 miles solid. Everything working, priced at $4,000. The chapter was buying it. It would be in her name, fully registered, insured for 6 months. Healthcare, the chapter's medical contact at the free clinic on Warren Street, had agreed to take Lily as a patient immediately. Full pediatric care, no cost covered by the clinic's charitable fund that the chapter had been contributing to for 4 years. Employment, a production supervisor position, had opened at Millhaven Precision Manufacturing 3 weeks ago. It wasn't a waitress job. It required some training, 6 weeks of paid onboarding. The chapter's contact there was the plant manager. The interview was arranged for Monday morning at 9 if she wanted it. Childcare during training, a chapter member's wife ran a licensed home daycare with 2 open spots. $50 a week sliding scale had agreed to $50 as the number. And the waiting list. Jack had made 2 calls this morning, one to the county housing director and one to the chapter's attorney, who apparently had a relationship with said housing director that predated everyone's memory of how it had started. Denise's waiting list, it turned out, became significantly shorter when the right phone call confirmed that a family had incoming stable housing and employment lined up, and that the interim support was being formally documented. He closed the folder. The room was completely silent except for the heater and the distant sound of a truck on the highway. "The house takes 4 weeks minimum," he said. "Until it's done, you're in this room. It's covered." He paused. "That's the plan. All of it." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. She was doing something she almost never did. She was trying to find the problem, the catch, the thing that was going to unravel. She'd been trained by experience to find those things, and she was looking hard. "Why would the plant manager do that?" she said. "The interview." "Because I asked him." "What does that mean to him?" "It means a favor he can call in later. That's how the world works." He paused. "The difference is that this favor improves your life instead of costing you anything." "And the lot, the house." She kept her voice steady. "What does it cost the chapter?" "Materials and labor. That's not nothing." "No," he said, "it's not. And you're doing it because of one night." He looked at her with those gray eyes, and his voice when he spoke was very quiet. "I'm doing it because of one woman," he said, "who had nothing left and still chose to give it. And because my whole life, every code I've claimed to live by says that when you see something like that, you don't look away. You match it." He stopped. "The chapter doesn't do this often, but when we do it completely." Sarah looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Can I see the folder?" He handed it to her. She read every page. It took 11 minutes, and Jack sat in the chair and waited without fidgeting. And Lily quietly climbed off the bed and came and stood next to Sarah and looked at the papers too, not understanding most of it, but closed the way she was close whenever she sensed that something important was happening. The documents were real. The lot deed was photocopied, the property address, visible 14 Deering Street. The plant manager's name was on a printed email thread, the interview confirmation typed out. The clinic contact. The auto shop quote. All of it, real, all of it, specific, all of it, the kind of thing that could be verified and would hold up in daylight. She looked up. "The house title," she said. "I want an attorney to review the transfer before I sign anything." Agreed. "Not your attorney, a neutral one, someone I choose." Something moved in his face, not offense, something closer to the opposite. "Absolutely. And I want it understood by everyone in that parking lot, by the whole chapter, that this is not a debt. I'm not going to owe this. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life feeling like I have to be grateful in a way that costs me my autonomy." She kept her voice level. "I'm accepting this because it's what Lily needs, and because you're right that I can build from here on my own. Not because I want to belong to something I didn't choose." He nodded, slowly and completely. "Understood," he said. "Say it clearly." "You don't owe us anything," he said. "Not gratitude, not access, not loyalty. You don't owe us a single thing. The house is yours free of any obligation. The car is yours. The job is an interview, you earned that yourself." He paused. "The only thing I'd ask, and it's not a condition, it's a request, is that you let us know how Lily is doing sometime. Not to keep tabs, just because we'd like to know." She looked at him. "That," she said, "I can do." She held out her hand. He took it. His grip was firm and brief, a real handshake, not a performance. "Okay," she said. "Okay, let's talk about what happens next." What happened next was this. Danny came in from the parking lot with a legal pad, and the 6 men redistributed themselves into useful configurations, and the room that had been the smallest, most provisional shelter Sarah had found in 62 days became for an hour something that resembled a planning meeting. There was a man named Carl who was the contractor who talked about foundation timing and weather windows with the specific enthusiasm of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of project. There was a man named Reyes who was the electrician who had questions about square footage and panel amperage that Carl answered over Sarah's head until Sarah asked a question about the breaker box, and Reyes stopped and looked at her with new attention. "You know electrical?" he asked. "My uncle was an electrician. I spent 3 summers handing him tools." She paused. "I know enough to know what questions to ask." Reyes grinned. "Good. Means you can call me out if I'm cutting corners." "I will," she said. Lily had attached herself to Big Mike, which was both the most unexpected development of the morning and the most logical one. Big Mike was massive and gentle and produced a deck of cards from somewhere, and he and Lily were playing a game that seemed to have evolving rules she was inventing as they went. Big Mike was losing on purpose, slowly and with great theatrical anguish, and every time he lost, he looked more genuinely delighted about it. Jack watched this from the chair by the window. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the bed, going through the folder page by page with Carl and making actual notes when she looked up and caught Jack's expression. He was watching Lily and Mike, and he looked like a man who had been carrying something a very long time and had just been allowed for a moment to set it down. She looked away before he noticed her looking. At 2 in the afternoon, with a plan in place and a Monday morning interview confirmed, and a set of keys for a 2018 Honda Accord that Big Mike drove around to the parking lot and parked next to the dead Chevy, with a directness that felt both shocking and right, Danny sat down across from Sarah and opened his notebook. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was different from the morning, quieter. "Okay," Sarah said. "The chapter doesn't know everything about tonight yet. The full version, what you actually gave up, how you found him, the soup, all of it." He paused. When Jack told them this morning on the call, the full version, there was about 20 seconds of silence. He looked at her. "That doesn't happen in our chapter. 20 guys you've never heard 20 of them go quiet at the same time." She didn't know what to say to that. "I'm telling you," Danny said, "because I want you to understand the scale of what's coming. It's not 6 guys in a parking lot. It's not a contractor and an electrician." He paused. Jack put out a chapter-wide call this morning. Full network, not just Millhaven Regional. He let that sit. There are going to be more people here than you're expecting. Sarah looked at him. How many? She said. Danny looked at his notebook, then he looked up. As of 9 this morning, he said carefully, we had confirmation from 412. The number landed in the room like something physical. 400, she stopped. It's growing, he said. It's been growing since Jack made the call. He paused. People want to come. People want to be part of this. He held her gaze. You gave our president his life back. In this world, in our world, that's not a small thing. That's not something that gets a gift card and a thank you note. Sarah was very still. 412 people. She thought about that number and could not make it fit inside anything she understood about her own life. She was one person. She had been one person in a dead car with a 6-year-old and $43. She was the smallest version of a life she'd ever been, and somehow that smallest version had set something in motion so large she couldn't see the edges of it. What are they going to do? She managed. Build, Danny said simply. Most of them build. The ones who don't build, they supply. Food materials, equipment. We've got a lumber supplier in Rockford who's donating everything above cost. A concrete contractor from Chicago who's driving down Saturday. He paused. It's going to move fast. 4 to 6 weeks becomes 2 weeks when you've got that many people who know what they're doing. She looked at the folder in her lap. She looked at the keys to the Honda on the nightstand. She looked at Lily, who had beaten Big Mike at cards again and was now patiently explaining to him where he'd gone wrong. She's going to remember this, Sarah said. Not to Danny specifically, just out loud, the thought finding its way into the room. Her whole life she's going to remember this winter, what it looked like, what it felt like. She paused. I need her to remember it right. I need her to know that the hard part was real and the help was real, and neither one of those things cancels the other out. Danny was quiet for a moment. What does that mean for you? He asked. She looked at him. It means I'm going to tell her the truth, every part of it. When she's old enough for each piece, she gets it. She paused. The cold, the soup, the overpass, all of it. Even the part where you almost didn't go up the hill, he asked quietly. She held his gaze. Especially that part, she said, because that's the part that actually means something. The part where you want to turn around and you go anyway. She stopped. That's what I want her to know is possible. Not that good things happen to good people. I've seen enough to know that's not reliable, but that you can go toward the hard thing anyway. And sometimes when you do, she stopped again, looked at the keys on the nightstand, at the folder, at Jack Sullivan by the window watching the parking lot with his bad legs stretched out and his hands quiet in his lap. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Outside in the parking lot of a Missing Letters motel on a frozen February afternoon, a man named Carl was on his phone talking about foundation footings. A man named Reyes was sketching something on the back of a receipt. Big Mike was losing cards on purpose to a 6-year-old who was reinventing the rules in real time. And somewhere in the regional network that Jack Sullivan had activated at 6 that morning, 412 people, now 419, now 426, were confirming that they were coming. The ground had not yet begun to shake, but it would. Carl Briggs had been a licensed contractor for 26 years, and in those 26 years, he had built 41 houses, renovated more kitchens and bathrooms than he could count, and supervised 3 commercial projects that had come in under budget and ahead of schedule. He was not a man who got emotional about construction. He talked about load-bearing walls and vapor barriers and R-value insulation the way other men talked about sports scores fluently, constantly, with genuine passion, but without sentiment. He cried on the 3rd day. Sarah didn't see it happen. Danny told her about it later quietly, the way you shared information that the person involved would never share themselves. Carl had been up on the framing they'd gotten, the foundation poured in 36 hours, a concrete contractor from Chicago, running a night crew and rotating shifts, and the framing had gone up in 48 more because Carl had 23 people who knew what they were doing and 11 more who were learning fast and listening to every word he said. On the 3rd morning, Carl had stood back from the structure to check the sight lines on the north wall, and Danny had seen his shoulders move in a way that wasn't cold, wasn't a cough, wasn't anything except a man being briefly undone by what he was looking at. When Danny told Sarah this, she was in the middle of making coffee in the motel room, the room that the chapter had extended again now through the end of the 2 weeks, and she stopped with the coffee pot in her hand and looked at him. "Why?" she asked. Danny looked at his hands. He lost his wife 2 years ago. She'd always wanted him to do pro bono work. Said the skills he had were the kind that could change people's lives if he aimed them right. He paused. He never did. Too busy, always a paying job coming, always a reason. He stopped. This is the first time. Sarah set the coffee pot down. She stood very still. She had been in a managed state of emotional suspension since Thursday morning, since the planning meeting, since the keys to the Honda, since the number 412 and its companions. She had been functioning with the controlled efficiency of someone who understood that if she let herself fully feel what was happening, she would stop being able to navigate it. So she moved through each day with Lily in the motel, took the Monday interview at Millhaven Precision, and sat across from the plant manager and answered questions for 40 minutes, and shook his hand at the end, and drove the Honda back to the motel and sat in the parking lot for 7 minutes before going inside. She was going to find out tomorrow whether she got the job. She was aware in a low-level, constant way of what was happening on Deering Street. She'd been there twice, once with Carl on Friday when it was still a lot with utility stakes and string lines, and Carl walking her through where each room would be, with his hands building the house in the air above the frozen ground. And once on Sunday when the foundation was poured and setting, and she'd stood at the edge of it and looked at the rectangle of concrete and tried to make it real in her mind, and mostly failed. Lily had no such difficulty. Lily had stood at the edge of the foundation on Sunday and pointed at different sections and said, "That's my room. That part's the kitchen. Is that the living room? That one's bigger." She'd been completely certain about all of it, the way children were certain about blueprints they'd only seen in their own heads. Carl had crouched beside her and confirmed each designation with the gravity of a man discussing actual plans, and Lily had nodded and said, "Good, I want a window in my room that faces the backyard." Carl had written it down. Now it was Wednesday, day 7, and Sarah was standing in the motel room, learning that the man building her house had cried because of what it meant to him, and the emotional suspension she'd been maintaining cracked a little around the edges. "He's okay," she said. "Better than okay," Danny said. He went right back up the ladder. He paused. "But I thought you should know about what this is for people." He met her gaze. "It's not just for you. I mean, it is for you, that's the whole point. But the people out there, what they're getting out of it." He stopped. Tried again. "Sometimes doing the right thing at the right moment gives people something back. Something they thought they'd lost." She thought about that all day. The count had stopped updating publicly at 540. Danny had told her this on Saturday, with an expression that indicated he found it remarkable. But privately, she suspected it had kept climbing, and someone had made a decision to stop reporting the number to her. She'd seen the lot on Sunday. She'd seen what 50 people could do in 18 hours with the right materials and organization. 540 was not a number she could visualize doing things to a house. It was a number she could only experience as sound and motion and the particular organized chaos of a project too large for its own momentum to slow down. She was at the motel at 9:14 on Wednesday morning when her phone rang. Unknown number, Illinois area code. "Ms. Mitchell," a woman's voice, professional warm. "Yes. This is Jennifer Carrillo, HR, Directorate at Millhaven Precision Manufacturing." A brief pause. "I'm calling to offer you the production supervisor position." Sarah sat down on the edge of the bed. "The onboarding start date would be February 24th, Jennifer continued, "which gives you 2 weeks. Full benefits begin at 90 days. The salary we discussed." "Yes," Sarah said. "I remember the salary. It was $41,000 a year. $41,000 a year was not a fortune by any national standard. It was a fortune by the standard of $43 and a can of soup." "Do you need time to consider?" Jennifer asked. "No," Sarah said. "I accept." There was a brief, genuine warmth in Jennifer Carrillo's voice when she said, "Wonderful. We'll send the formal offer letter to the email address you provided." Sarah hung up the phone. She sat for a moment, then she stood up and went to the bathroom and turned on the cold water and put her hands under it and stood there until the cold centered her enough to think clearly. She had a Waymo, she had a car, she had a house being built by 540 people. She had a pediatrician appointment for Lily on Friday. She had $15 that had somehow never gotten spent because every time she reached for a need, it had already been addressed by someone with a notebook and a contact and a willingness to make a call. She went to get Lily from Big Mike's supervision. Mike had appointed himself unofficial childcare coordinator, appearing each morning with a reliability that was both touching and slightly bewildering, with activities that ranged from card games to a nature documentary. He streamed on his phone to one memorable afternoon, teaching Lily the correct way to check a tire's air pressure, which she had practiced on all 4 Honda tires with intense focus. Mike was in the parking lot with Lily when Sarah came out. Lily was explaining something to him with both hands, the full-body expressiveness that meant she was mid-story, and Mike was listening with the particular attention of a very large, very gentle man who found a 6-year-old completely compelling. "Mike," Sarah said. He looked up. "I got the job." His face broke into something that had no calculation in it, pure, uncomplicated delight, the grin of a man who didn't bother managing his reactions. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah." He let out a sound that was approximately a cheer and approximately a laugh and turned to Lily. "Your mama got the job." Lily looked at Sarah. "The factory job. The factory job." Lily processed this for approximately 1 second. Then she held up both hands and Mike high-fived them both with the exaggerated care of someone being extremely precise with a great deal of physical power. "Can we tell Jack?" Lily asked. "I'll call him," Sarah said. "Can I tell him?" Sarah looked at her daughter. "You can tell him." She dialed Jack's number and handed the phone to Lily, who took it with the authority of a person entrusted with important news and waited for the pickup. "Jack," Lily said when he answered. "My mama got the job." A pause, listening. I know she did." Another pause longer. Then Lily laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded, the sound Sarah had been feeding herself on for 62 days. "Okay, bye." She handed the phone back. He said he's not surprised. Sarah took the phone. Jack had already hung up. She looked at the screen for a moment, then put it in her pocket. She went to Deering Street that afternoon. She hadn't planned to. She'd been managing her visits carefully once, maybe twice a week, controlled exposure to something that still didn't feel entirely real. But she was in the Honda with the job offer sitting warm in her chest, and she found herself turning onto Deering without deciding to muscle memory of a route she'd driven 3 times, pulling the wheel before her brain caught up. What she saw when she got there stopped her completely. She'd seen 50 people on Sunday. Today the number was different in a way she could feel before she could count. The lot was alive with movement, organized and purposeful, operating with the logic of something that had found its own rhythm. The framing was fully up, and she hadn't known it would be. She'd expected maybe by Friday, and seeing it standing, the actual skeleton of a house, walls and angles, and the beginning of a roof line hit her in the sternum like a physical impact. She sat in the Honda for a full minute. A man she didn't recognize knocked on her window. Mid-50s, gray jacket, work gloves. She rolled the window down. "Sarah Mitchell," he said. "Yes." "I'm Pete Larson. I drove down from Madison." He said it simply, just information. "My wife and I, our youngest, went through something similar a couple years back. Single mom, 2 kids, lost her apartment. Took a long time to get back." He stopped. When Jack put out the call, it didn't feel like a question whether to come. He paused. "I do windows and exterior doors. Your south-facing windows are going in today. I picked them myself, double-pane, low-E glass. Good thermal rating. Your heating bills are going to be low." Sarah looked at him. "Thank you," she said. It came out insufficient, as it always did. She'd stopped apologizing for the insufficiency. "Thank you," Pete Larson said, which was not what she'd expected, and he went back to work before she could respond. She got out of the car. Carl found her within 90 seconds, which told her he'd been watching for her arrival. He walked her through the framing with the same hands-in-the-air technique as before, but now it had scaffolding and actual walls, and the air inside was slightly genuinely different from the air outside the framing, already doing the basic work of defining space. "Kitchen faces east," Carl said, walking her through. "Morning light comes in strong. I know you didn't specify, but it seemed right." He paused. "Did I overstep?" "No," she said. "Morning light into the kitchen is right." He nodded. "Lily's room has the south window. Pete's putting it in today. Big window. I went bigger than standard. She said she wanted to see the whole backyard." "She did say that." "Kid knows what she wants." He said it with admiration. Reyes has got the panel roughed in. Plumbing's behind by half a day, but we'll make it up tomorrow with the second crew coming from Peoria. He flipped pages in his clipboard. We're on track for 2 weeks from the foundation pour. Maybe 9 days if the weather holds. 9 days. She was standing in the skeleton of a house that had been a concrete rectangle 6 days ago, and the man building it was telling her 9 days. Carl, she said. Yeah. How many people have come through here this week? He thought about it. 2-day count direct workers, not counting the supply. Runs probably 2, 10 to 20. People rotate. Do their days go home, new crew comes in. He paused. We had a retired couple from Champaign come Tuesday. 70s. Husband did tile for 40 years. His wife painted. They did the bathroom tile in 6 hours, and it's perfect. I've never seen tile work like that. He stopped, looked at his clipboard, looked at her. This is not a normal job. No, she said, it's not. I don't mean the logistics. He met her eyes. I mean what's happening here, what it is. He stopped again, and she could see him choosing words carefully the way people did when they were trying to say something they hadn't entirely said before. I've built a lot of things. I'm good at it, but I've never built something that mattered to this many people at the same time. He paused. Your name is on things I've never put a name on. Not because the client asked, but because it felt wrong not to. She didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. My wife would have liked you, Carl said quietly to his clipboard. She heard what that meant. She didn't ask him to explain it. Tell me about the roofline, she said. He told her about the roofline. She stayed for 2 hours. She helped where she could, not construction. She had no construction skills, but the peripheral work, the logistics chain that kept the build moving. Running coffee from the truck at the curb to the workers inside, relaying Carl's material requests to the supply runner, holding things while other people attached them. The men and women on the lot accepted her presence without ceremony, which was the right way to do it. No one made her feel like a visitor. No one made her feel like a recipient. She was just another person in the building doing what needed doing. At 4 o'clock, she had to get back to Lily. She was heading to the Honda when she heard her name. Male voice unfamiliar coming from the direction of the street. She turned. A man was standing at the edge of the lot, young mid-20s, her first impression with dark hair and Jack's jaw, and Jack's gray eyes and a face that hadn't finished settling into its final form yet. He was in a regular jacket, no vest, no patches. He was holding a coffee that he wasn't drinking, just holding the way people held things when their hands needed something to do. She looked at him, he looked at her. Are you Sarah Mitchell? He said. Yes. He breathed. One long, visible breath like he'd been holding it for longer than the length of this conversation. I'm Cody Sullivan. The name landed in the cold air between them, and she felt it the way she'd felt the 412 too large for immediate processing, requiring a moment to find its edges. Jack's son, the name Jack had called out on the hillside. The name he'd said in the car quietly in the dark to himself more than to her. 24 years old. 3 years of distance. 20 minutes from the chapter house for 3 years. Coming here today to Deering Street in a regular jacket with no patches. Your dad, she started. He called me, Cody said. Wednesday morning, 4 days ago. He stopped. His voice was steady but not easy. First time in 11 months. She waited. He told me what happened. He looked past her at the house frame, at the people moving through it, at the organized, impossible fact of it. He told me the whole thing. The storm, the hill, the soup. He stopped again. Swallowed. He told me about Lily asking you to take 2 sips. Sarah watched his face. He told me something else, Cody said. He told me he was calling from a hospital at 6 in the morning with a broken leg, and the first thing he'd done when he could hold a phone was start calling people to help you. He paused. He said he'd spent 20 years being the guy who showed up when it mattered, but he'd stopped knowing which things mattered. He looked at her. He said you reminded him. She didn't know what to do with the full weight of what she was hearing. She stood in the cold at the edge of the lot where her house was being built, and she looked at Jack Sullivan's son, and she thought about what it meant, what it actually meant to have one hard night become a thread that pulled on all of this. The house, the grub, Carl's grief finding an outlet, Pete Larson's windows, Cody Sullivan standing here in a regular jacket having answered a phone call he'd let go to voicemail for 3 years. Are you going to see him? She asked. Cody looked at the lot again. I drove here from Milwaukee, he said. 3 hours. He paused. He doesn't know I came. He looked back at her. I wanted to see this first, before I saw him. He was quiet for a moment. I needed to see if it was real. It's real, she said. He looked at the house frame, at the people, at the roofline Carl had been explaining to her 20 minutes ago. Yeah, he said quietly. It's real. She made a decision without fully thinking it through, the same way she'd made every decision that mattered in the last week, from the hill to the car to the hospital, phone call to the handshake in the motel room. Come have coffee, she said. I've got to get back to my daughter. But you can tell me about Milwaukee on the way to the motel, and then I'll give you Jack's number as if you don't have it, and you can decide what you want to do. He looked at her with his father's gray eyes. You sound like him, he said, the way you just did that. Did what? Decided something and moved. She started walking toward the Honda. After a moment, she heard his footsteps behind her. She got Lily from the motel where Mike had fallen asleep in the parking lot truck, with his mouth slightly open, while Lily watched the nature documentary on his phone, the wildlife narration going at full volume while Mike snored lightly beneath it. Sarah tapped the window, and Mike came awake with the immediate alertness of someone trained out of gradual waking, and Lily handed him his phone with the solemn finality of task completion. Penguins, Lily reported to Sarah. They walk 100 miles in the cold. We know something about that, Sarah said. Lily looked at Cody, who was standing by the Honda. Who are you? She asked. Cody, he said. Jack's Cody, she said. He blinked. Yeah? Lily looked at Sarah. Jack said he was going to call him. He did, Sarah said. Lily nodded as if this confirmed the correct operation of the universe. Good, she said, and got in the car. They went to the diner 2 miles east. Sarah's choice, the same one Danny had ordered breakfast from on Thursday morning. They sat in a booth, Lily between Sarah and Cody on one side, which was Lily's decision, made by sliding in before anyone could direct traffic, and Cody sat across from them with a coffee and the expression of someone who had walked into a situation more complicated than expected and was finding it in some way a relief. He talked about Milwaukee, about the 3 years the gap, what it had felt like to maintain it, the specific effort of keeping distance from someone you were angry at and loved simultaneously, the way both of those things were true and neither canceled the other. He talked about his mother, Jack's ex-wife, who had remarried and lived in Phoenix and who called him every Sunday with a consistency he depended on more than he had admitted to himself. He talked about his job. He managed a climbing gym, which he'd expected to be temporary, and had turned out to suit him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Lily listened to all of this with her chin on her hand. Are you going to forgive him? She asked when Cody paused for coffee. Lily, Sarah said. It's a real question, Lily said. Cody looked at the 6-year-old. He was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said honestly. That's okay, Lily said. Forgiving takes a while sometimes. Mama says it's not a switch. Cody looked at Sarah. She's right, Sarah said. It's not a switch. What is it? He asked, genuine, not rhetorical. Sarah thought about it. She thought about Marcus leaving, about the eviction, about 62 days in a dead car, about the specific work of not letting what had happened to her make her into someone she didn't want to be. It's more like a door, she said. You don't have to go through it. You just have to stop standing in front of it like it's the whole wall. Cody sat with that. He's different, he said finally. On the phone Wednesday. Something was different. He stopped. I've been waiting for him to sound different for 10 years. People are different after they almost die on a hill in a blizzard, Sarah said. In my experience. He almost smiled. In your experience. Recent experience. He finished his coffee. He looked at the table for a moment and then looked up. I'm going to call him tonight, he said. I think I'm going to drive to wherever the chapter put him up. He paused. I don't know what we're going to say. You don't have to know in advance, Sarah said. You just have to go. He nodded. He picked up the check before she could reach for it, which she allowed without argument because he needed to do something useful with his hands, and she could feel that about him. When Cody left, Lily watched him through the diner window as he got into his car. He's going to go, Lily said. Yeah, Sarah said. I think he is. Jack's going to be surprised. Yeah. Lily turned back to her hot chocolate. Good, she said again with the same settled conviction as before the words she apparently used when the world was for a moment doing what it was supposed to do. That night alone in the motel room after Lily was asleep, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what Danny had said that morning. About Carl, about what it meant to do the right thing at the right moment and give people something back. She thought about Pete Larson's wife and her 2 kids and the long road back. She thought about the retired couple from Champaign and 40 years of tile work poured into a bathroom floor. She thought about a climbing gym manager in Milwaukee who had gotten in a car and driven 3 hours because something in his father's voice on a Wednesday morning had finally been different. She thought about the night at the overpass, the sound of the motorcycle, the embankment, the 11 minutes coming down the hill with a man who outweighed her by 90 pounds. She had not made a calculation that night. She had not weighed the risk against the return. She had heard a voice calling a name, and she had gone toward it the way she was built to do, the way 62 days of impossible circumstance had not changed in her. She wondered sometimes what would have happened if she hadn't. If she'd made the other decision, the reasonable one, the safe one, the one every survival instinct she had was urging at the time. She would still be under the overpass. Jack would have been found eventually, probably maybe in time. The night would have passed and morning would have come and nothing would have been any different. But the soup would still be full. And she understood, sitting in a warm motel room with her daughter breathing slowly in the bed, and a job offer on her phone and a house frame standing on Deering Street, that the soup being full was not actually a better outcome. Not for any version of herself she wanted to be. Her phone buzzed. Jack, she answered. Cody came, he said. No preamble. His voice was different from any version of it she'd heard, yet not the hypothermia roughness from the storm, not the careful authority from the motel planning meeting, not the quiet certainty from the hospital call. This was something else, something that had been compressed for a very long time and had in the last few hours been allowed to expand. I know, she said. You talked to him. We had coffee. A pause. He told me. Another pause. He told me what you said about the door. She was quiet. Sarah. His voice was steady, but it was working at being steady. He stopped. I don't have the right words for tonight. What Cody and he stopped again. I just needed you to know that whatever happens with the house, with everything tonight, this is the part I couldn't have. He stopped a third time. Jack, she said. Yeah, I know. A long silence. Outside the highway was quiet. Inside, Lily breathed. How's the leg, she said. He made a sound that was definitively a laugh, this time short, real unperformed. It hurts, he said. Good, she said. Means it's healing. That's not how that works. That's exactly how that works. Another pause, and she could hear something lighter in it, something that had room to be lighter now. 9 days, he said. Carl called me. He thinks 9 days. I know, he told me. You went to the lot today. I did. And she thought about what to say. She thought about standing in the framing with Carl and looking up at the roofline and feeling the beginning of something she didn't have a name for yet. Not just gratitude, bigger than that, wider, something that included Lily's south-facing window and Pete Larson's thermal glass and the retired couple's perfect tile and Cody Sullivan sitting in a diner booth not knowing what to say and going anyway. It's real, she said. The same words she'd said to Cody at the edge of the lot. I keep thinking it won't be when I look at it, but it's real. Yeah, Jack said. The window in Lily's room is big, she said. Carl went bigger than standard. She said she wanted to see the whole backyard. She said that at the foundation pour. Carl wrote it down. Of course he did. A pause. She's going to have a good life, Sarah. The sentence landed simply and completely without decoration. She pressed her hand flat on her thigh the way she did when she needed to keep something from spilling. I know, she said. I think I actually know that now. Oh. They talked for 11 more minutes about nothing consequential. Carl's project timeline, the south window specs, whether the Honda needed an oil change soon, whether the diner 2 miles east had good pie, which Jack said it did, and Sarah said she hadn't tried it yet, and Jack said that needed to be corrected. It was the kind of conversation that had no specific purpose except the purpose of being had, of two people finding that talking to each other was easy in a way that didn't require explanation. When she hung up, she sat for a moment with the quiet of the room. 9 days. She thought about what 9 days meant. In 9 days, she would walk through a door that belonged to her. She would put Lily's things in a room with a south-facing window and a view of the whole backyard. She would stand in a kitchen that faced east and watch the morning come in. She would have done all of this from $43 and a can of soup and one decision on a frozen hill. And then the things she had been holding away from herself, carefully, deliberately, at arm's length for 9 days, stopped being holdable. She put her face in her hands. She cried for 4 minutes alone in the dark while her daughter slept, and the crying was not grief and not relief and not gratitude specifically. But all three of those things combined into something her body needed to do and had been waiting to do since the moment she'd heard 412 and understood that she had never been as alone as the last 62 days had made her feel. When she was done, she washed her face and looked in the mirror and looked like herself, the sharpened version, the watchful version, the version that had been solving problems continuously since December. Except for something around the eyes that was different, not softer, more open, like a window that had been painted shut and had been recently and with some effort unstuck. She went to bed. She was asleep in 6 minutes. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning with the temperature up to 28 degrees and the sun doing something real for the first time in weeks, Sarah Mitchell pulled the Honda into the lot on Deering Street and sat in the driver's seat and looked at a house. Not a frame, not a skeleton, a house. The exterior was done siding up roofline, complete windows and front door, hung and painted a deep red that she did not remember choosing, and would later learn was Lily's suggestion relayed to Carl by Mike on day 6, with the authority of an executive decision. The landscaping was minimal, winter didn't allow for much, but the walk was cleared, the porch boards were solid under her feet when she stepped on them, and the door opened with a key that had been handed to her 10 minutes ago by Carl in the parking lot of the motel, who had pressed it into her palm without ceremony and said, "It's done," and then had to look at his boots for a moment. She stood on the porch. Lily was beside her, holding her hand. "Mama," Lily said. "Yeah." "Are we going in, Ma?" She looked at the red door. She thought about the overpass, the soup, the 11 minutes on the hill, the motel room and Danny's notebook and Jack's gray eyes saying, "You drive this." She thought about Carl and Pete Larson and the retired couple, and Cody Sullivan in a diner booth, and a climbing gym in Milwaukee, and a phone call on a Wednesday morning that had finally sounded different. She thought about $43. She put her hand on the door. She turned the key. The door opened into warmth. That was the first thing before the smell of new wood and fresh paint, before the light coming through Pete Larson's south-facing windows, before any of the specific details that Sarah would spend the next hour cataloging with the careful attention of someone memorizing something irreplaceable. The warmth. The heat that met her face when the red door swung inward was so immediate and so complete that her body responded before her mind did a full-body exhale. She hadn't known she was holding the specific release of a person who had been cold for so long. That warmth had stopped feeling like a baseline and had become instead a gift. Lily walked in first. She didn't wait, didn't look back, didn't ask permission. She walked through the door with the directness of someone arriving somewhere they already belonged. Her boots on the new floor, making sounds that echoed slightly in the empty rooms, and Sarah heard her moving from room to room. Each footstep a small declaration of presence. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment longer. She put her hand on the frame. The wood was solid under her palm, real and specific, the grain of it visible in the winter light. Carl had used good lumber. She knew enough now, after 2 weeks of watching the house go up board by board, to know the difference between good lumber and the kind that warped by spring. Carl had used the good kind. Of course he had. She stepped inside and closed the red door behind her. The living room was to her left, empty now, just floor and walls, and the light coming through the east-facing window that Carl had told her got morning sun. The kitchen was ahead, and she could see it from where she stood, the cabinets installed, the counters, a clean white, the faucet catching the light when she moved. To her right, the hallway that led to the 2 bedrooms, and she could already hear Lily at the end of it. "Mama?" Lily's voice came from the back of the house, high and clear and carrying. "Mama, come see?" She went. Lily was standing in the center of her room. It was a good-sized room, bigger than Sarah had expected because Carl had made the geometry work in ways she hadn't followed on the blueprint, and the window was enormous. Pete Larson had not gone standard size. He had gone large the way Carl had told her, and the window filled most of the south wall, and the light through it was the kind that made the whole room feel like the inside of something warm and habitable. Lily was standing in the exact center of it, looking out at the backyard. "I can see the whole yard," she said. "You asked for that." "I know." She turned around. Her face was doing something Sarah hadn't seen in a long time. Not the careful watchfulness, not the old eyes reading of her mother's expressions, but something younger than both, something that was just a 6-year-old girl standing in a room that was hers. "It's my room. It's your room. No one else's. No one else's." Lily nodded once with the gravity of someone ratifying a treaty. Then she sat down on the floor in the center of it and looked up at the ceiling and said, "I'm going to sleep here tonight. We don't have furniture yet." On the floor. Lily. "Mama," she looked at her mother with absolute certainty. "I'm sleeping here tonight. I don't need furniture." Sarah looked at her daughter on the floor of her room in the south window light. "Okay," she said. She went to the kitchen and stood in it and put her hands on the counter and looked at the east-facing window and the light that Carl had said came in strong in the mornings. And she believed him. She could see how it would come in the angle of it, the way it would move across the counter when the sun was up. And she stood there with her hands on the counter of her kitchen in her house, and she let herself believe in the morning. Her phone rang. "Jack." "You went in," he said when she answered. Not a question. "How did you know?" "Carl texted me when he saw your car in the lot." A pause. "How is it?" She looked around the kitchen. She thought about how to answer that, the full answer, the true one, the one that didn't reduce to something manageable, but was instead the exact size of what she was feeling. "Lily is sitting on the floor of her room," she said. "She's going to sleep there tonight." A silence. Then, "Yeah," he said, and the word held everything that didn't need to be said. "Jack." She stopped, started again. "I want to say something, and I need you to just let me say it without deflecting." "Okay." "What you did," she stopped, breathed. "What you all did. Every person on that lot. Carl and Pete Larson and the couple from Champaign and Danny and Mike, and all 540 people whose names I don't know." She stopped again. "I'm not going to say thank you because that's not big enough, and I think you know that. So I'm going to say something different." He waited. "You gave my daughter a childhood back," she said. "Not just a house, not just heat and a roof. The thing that was getting taken from her, the ability to just be 6, to not spend her energy reading my face for information about whether we were safe, that's what you gave back." Her voice was steady, but it was working at it. She sat down on the floor of her room because it's her room. She didn't scan it for danger first. She didn't look at me to check. She just sat down. She paused. I haven't seen her do that since November. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. "Sarah," he said. "I'm not done," she said. "You also gave something back to yourself. I'm not going to tell you what that is because you know what it is, but I want you to know that I saw it from the beginning." She paused. "That night on the hill, you were calling Cody's name. Not the chapter, not anyone else. Him." She stopped. "You already knew what mattered. You needed something to remind you that you'd always known." Another silence. "He's coming for dinner Sunday," Jack said. His voice was quieter than she'd heard it. "Cody, he's driving down from Milwaukee." A pause. "He called me yesterday and asked if I liked Italian food. I said yes. He said he was going to make his mother's lasagna recipe." He stopped. "His mother, my ex-wife's recipe." "That's not an accident," Sarah said. "No," Jack said. "It's not." She heard him breathe. "You're going to be okay," she said. "You and Cody. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be chill, but you're going to be okay." "How do you know?" "Because he made the drive to Deering Street before he called you," she said. "He needed to see if it was real. Once he saw it was real, he called." She paused. "That's not someone who's done. That's someone who needed proof that you were capable of doing real things." Jack was quiet for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," he said. "When I was on that hill and you showed up, you're not what I expected at all." "What did you expect?" I don't know, something more fragile given the circumstances. She almost laughed. I was fragile. I was terrified. Yeah, he said, but you went anyway. She looked around her kitchen. She looked at the east window in the afternoon light that was already doing something interesting with the counter, and she thought about the morning version of that light and what it would feel like to stand here in it with coffee while Lily slept in the next room. I always go anyway, she said. It's the one thing I've never been able to stop doing. Don't stop, he said. She heard something behind the words. Not instruction, not flattery, but something more like a plea, the kind you made to the universe when you found something in it worth protecting. I won't, she said. They hung up and she stood in her kitchen alone for a minute, and then Lily appeared in the doorway. Who was that, Jack? What did he say? He asked how the house was. Lily looked around the kitchen with the proprietary satisfaction she'd been wearing since she walked through the front door. You should have told him it's perfect, she said. I think he knows. Lily went back to her room. Sarah stood in the kitchen and made a list in her head, furniture, groceries, the basics she needed before tonight. And then she stopped making the list because the list could wait and the afternoon couldn't, and she walked back to Lily's room and sat down on the floor beside her daughter, and they both looked out the big south window at a backyard covered in February snow. What are we going to do with the yard? Lily asked. What do you want to do with it? Lily thought about it seriously. A garden, she said, with tomatoes, and maybe a swing. We can do that. In the spring. In the spring. Lily leaned against Sarah's arm. They sat on the floor of the empty room in the afternoon light, and outside the snow was bright and still, and inside the house was warm, and Sarah put her arm around her daughter and felt the particular weight of her 48 pounds of 6-year-old, the most familiar weight in her world, and did not think about November or December or January or the 43 days she'd spent before December or the 62 days she'd spent after. She thought about tomatoes in the spring. She thought about a swing. She thought about morning light on a kitchen counter. She thought about what came next, and for the first time in a long time, what came next did not feel like a threat. The call came 4 days later. She was at the kitchen table. She had a table now, a second-hand one that Danny had appeared with on Sunday morning in the back of his truck, along with 4 chairs and a cheerful total disregard for being thanked going through the paperwork from Millhaven Precision, the onboarding documents for her first day of training, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Wisconsin area code. She almost didn't answer. She was mid-form, pen in hand, and unknown numbers at 10 in the morning were usually automated or wrong. She answered. Ms. Mitchell, a woman's voice. Professional but warm underneath it. My name is Patricia Osei. I'm a producer with Channel 7 News in Milwaukee. I was wondering if you had a few minutes to talk. Sarah set her pen down. How did you get this number? She said. Someone in the Hells Angels chapter gave it to us. A pause. I want to be transparent with you. We've been working on a story about the build on Deering Street for the past week. We've spoken with several of the men who worked on it. We'd like to speak with you. Sarah was quiet. I'm not interested in making the chapter look like something they're not, Patricia Osei said, reading the silence correctly. And I'm not interested in making you into a symbol. I want to tell a real story. A pause. A woman gave a stranger everything she had on the worst night of her life. What happened after that is it's the kind of thing people need to hear right now. Not as a fairy tale, as something real. Sarah looked at the kitchen window. The morning light was doing exactly what Carl had said it would do. I have one condition, she said. What's that? Lily doesn't appear. No photos of her, no footage, no name on camera. She's 6 years old and this is my story to tell, not hers. A brief pause. Agreed, absolutely. And I get to see the segment before it airs. Another pause, slightly longer. That's not standard practice, but given the circumstances, yes, we can do that. Then I'll talk to you, Sarah said. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. She thought about whether she'd made the right call, the automatic question she asked herself after every significant decision, the reflex she developed over 62 days of having no margin for error. Then she stopped asking it. She'd made the call she'd made. She would build from there. She called Jack. He answered on the second ring. I know, he said before she could speak. You gave them my number. No, he said, I didn't, but I know who did and I've already made a call. A pause. Are you angry? She thought about it honestly. No, she said, I'm not. She paused. I think it's supposed to happen, the story. I don't know why exactly, but it feels like the next right thing. Yeah, he said, it does. I told them Lily stays out of it. Good. Jack, the chapter, are you comfortable with this? The attention. A pause. We've had attention before. Not usually this kind. He stopped. This kind we can handle. The interview happened on a Thursday. Patricia Osei was small and precise and had the particular skill of very good journalists, which was the ability to ask questions that open things rather than close them. She sat across from Sarah in Sarah's kitchen. Sarah had chosen the kitchen deliberately, the east window in the morning light, doing exactly what she'd wanted them to do in the background. And she asked questions for 90 minutes. She asked about before, about the diner and Marcus and the eviction and the shelter waiting list and Denise in the 62 days. Sarah answered all of it without softening it the way she told herself she would, the full version, the cold version, the $43 and the battery indicator and the camp stove and counting Lily's breaths in the dark. She asked about the night of the storm, about the sound of the crash and the embankment and the 11 minutes coming down and the specific decision point, the moment Sarah had looked at the Hells Angels patch and looked back at her car and chosen to go toward the man on the hill instead of away from him. What made you go? Patricia asked. Sarah looked at the table for a moment. He was calling someone's name, she said. Just a name, over and over. She looked up. When someone's dying and they call a name, that name is the whole world to them. That's everything left. She paused. I have a name like that. Lily, I understood what that sound meant. She stopped. You can't hear that and walk away. I can't. Patricia Osei was quiet for a moment. You gave him the soup, she said. All of it. There was enough for 2 cups. He got one. Lily and I split the other. But you were hungry. Yes. And you were scared. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes. She said it simply without drama, the way it had happened, simple and terrible and completely clear, the way every real thing was clear in the moment of doing it. Patricia looked at her notes and then looked up. What do you want people to understand from this? When they hear this story, what do you want them to take away? Sarah sat with the question. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. Not the easy version, not the version that packaged everything neatly and sold it in a format that felt good but didn't hold up in the actual cold. I want them to understand that it wasn't strength, she said. I wasn't strong that night. I was exhausted and scared, and I had $43 and a sick kid, and I wanted to stay in my car more than I've ever wanted anything. She paused. The going up that hill, it wasn't because I was brave. It was because not going felt worse. Not going would have made me into someone I couldn't live with. She stopped. And I think that's what compassion actually is. It's not a feeling. It's a choice you make when every instinct is saying don't. And sometimes when you make it, nothing comes back. Sometimes you go up the hill and you drag someone down and it costs you everything and nothing changes. She held Patricia's gaze. But sometimes the world turns out to be bigger than you thought. Sometimes what you give out into the dark comes back from a direction you never expected, and it's carrying something you didn't know you needed. She stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. I should tell you, Patricia Osei said, and her professional voice had something different in it now, something less managed, that I've been doing this job for 16 years, and I've sat across from a lot of people in a lot of kitchens. She paused. This is the first time I've had to stop recording to get my composure back. Sarah looked at her. Keep recording, she said. That's part of it too. The segment aired on a Sunday evening. Sarah watched it on the television that Mike had arrived with 11 days ago in the same cheerful truck and no discussion style as the kitchen table setting it up in the living room with the authority of someone completing a project they'd committed to. Lily watched it beside her on the couch that Carl had found secondhand solid, reupholstered in a dark blue fabric that Lily had chosen from 3 options with the decisiveness she brought to all aesthetic decisions. The segment ran 14 minutes, which was long for local news, and which Patricia had apparently had to fight for. It opened with the overpass footage of it in daylight, the highway above the space beneath, and Sarah felt Lily go very still beside her at the sight of it. That's where we were, Lily said quietly. Yeah, it looks different in the daytime. Everything does. The segment moved through the story in the order it happened before the night, the morning, the planning meeting, the build. There was footage from Deering Street, the framing going up, Carl walking the camera through the progress with the focused enthusiasm she'd come to recognize as his natural state. There was Jack on camera interviewed at the chapter house, looking like himself, the gray beard and the gray hair and the walking boot and the particular way he occupied space. Patricia had asked him one question on camera, just one. Why, she'd said. Jack had looked at the camera for a long moment. Because she went up the hill, he said. That's the whole answer. She went up the hill when she had every reason not to, when she had less than nothing and still went. If you ever see something like that, if you ever see someone make a choice that clean, you don't look away. You match it. He paused. That's what we did. We matched it. Lily looked at the television when Jack said that. She looked at it with her old eyes expression, the reading expression, and then she looked at Sarah. He says what he means, Lily said. Yeah, Sarah said. He does. The segment ended with the house exterior, shut the red door, the windows, and then Sarah's voice from the interview. No image, just her voice. Sometimes the world turns out to be bigger than you thought. The screen cut to the news anchor in the studio. Lily unmuted the sound. She'd turned it down for the last 30 seconds, for reasons Sarah didn't ask, and the anchor said, that story from Patricia Osei. Millhaven's Deering Street project is now complete. Sarah Mitchell and her daughter Lily moved in last Saturday. Lily turned off the television. She sat for a moment. They said my name, she said. Just your name. No picture, nothing else. Lily considered this. That's okay, she decided. Sarah looked at her daughter. You know what I keep thinking about, Lily said. What? The soup. She pulled her knees to her chest on the blue couch. I keep thinking about the soup because it wasn't that much. It was one can, and we gave most of it to Jack. She paused, and then all of this happened because of one can of soup. More than that, Sarah said, because of what we did with it. Yeah. Lily was quiet for a moment. Mama, do you think there are other people like us right now, in Mars or wherever? Cold, Sarah looked at her daughter. Yes, she said, there are. Do you think somebody's going to go up the hill for them? The questions sat in the room. Sarah felt its weight, the fullness of it, the way it reached past the specific story they'd lived and pointed at something larger. The underlying question about whether the world worked the way their particular night had suggested it could. I think, Sarah said carefully, that there are people like Jack in the world, people with the means to help and the willingness to use them when something wakes that up in them. She paused. And I think there are people like us, people who don't have anything to give except the willingness to go up the hill. And when those two things meet, she stopped. Yeah, I think someone's going up the hill for them. Lily nodded slowly. We should do something, Lily said. When we can, when we have enough. She looked at Sarah. I want to do something. What kind of something? Lily was quiet, working it out. I don't know yet, she said, but I'm going to figure it out. She said it with the settled certainty she brought to everything she'd decided. By the time I'm a grown-up, I'm going to know what it is. Sarah looked at her daughter who had lost a tooth in October and slept through hypothermia, warning signs, and split a can of soup 3 ways and chosen a red door and sat down on the floor of her room without scanning it for danger first. I know you will, she said. They sat together on the blue couch in the warm living room, while outside the February dark pressed against Pete Larson's thermal windows, without getting through, and the east-facing kitchen waited for morning. And somewhere in Milwaukee, a man named Cody was probably eating leftovers from a lasagna he'd made with his mother's recipe. For a father, he was in the slow non-switch process of forgiving. And a woman named Patricia Osei was reading the response to her segment and finding in it things she hadn't expected. And a retired couple from Champaign was asleep with a bathroom floor behind them they'd never stop being proud of. And Carl Briggs had a new project inquiry from someone who'd seen the segment and wanted to hire the contractor who built the Deering Street house. And in room 7 of the Route 9 Motor Lodge, the desk clerk who had quietly changed the rate to $28 and called it the family rate had watched the segment on her break and had not said anything to anyone about her part in it. She had just watched, and then she had gone back to work. 2 weeks after the segment aired, Sarah got a letter. Handwritten, no return address, Wisconsin postmark. She opened it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, with the east light coming in exactly the way Carl had said it would, strong and clear, the kind of morning light that made everything look like it had been recently cleaned. The letter was one page. The handwriting was careful, the kind of careful that meant someone had thought about each word before writing it. It said, "Ms. Mitchell, I don't know if you'll remember me. My name is Teresa. I saw your story on the news 3 weeks ago. At the time, I was in my car with my son, Marcus, age 8. We had been there for 12 days. I had $40. I had been telling myself that things would change before they got worse. They were not changing. I watched your story on my phone in the parking lot of a grocery store in Kenosha at 11 o'clock at night. I watched it twice. The next morning, I called the family crisis line and I asked for help. I am writing this from a transitional housing unit in Racine. Marcus slept in a real bed last night. He has an appointment at the school district on Thursday. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to know your hill." Sarah read the letter twice. Then she read it a third time. Then she got up and went to Lily's room where Lily was awake and looking out her big south window at a backyard full of February snow, the whole yard visible exactly as she'd asked for, and Sarah sat on the edge of her daughter's floor and held out the letter. "Read this," she said. Lily read it. Her lips moved slightly on the harder words. When she finished, she held it in her lap and looked up at her mother. "Marcus," she said, "same name as my dad." "Yeah, he slept in a real bed." "He did." Lily looked at the letter again. Then she looked out the south window. Then she looked at Sarah. "We need to write back," she said. "We do. Today." "Today," Sarah agreed. Lily handed the letter back and got up from the floor with the purposeful energy of someone with a task, and Sarah followed her to the kitchen table, where the morning light was still doing its work. The light that Carl had said would come in strong, the light that did exactly what it was supposed to do every morning without fail. Sarah got out paper. She got out a pen. She sat down. She thought about Teresa in a parking lot in Kenosha, watching a 14-minute news segment on a phone with whatever battery she had left. She thought about Teresa watching it twice. She thought about the specific decision of calling the crisis line in the morning, the one that felt like going towards something you weren't sure would catch you. She thought about every decision that had led here. The overpass, the hill, the soup, the words she'd said in the dark of a motel room to a man who wasn't surprised by it. She thought about $43 and what they had built. She put the pen to paper. Lily sat beside her and watched her write, and outside the morning was doing what mornings did. And the house on Deering Street stood exactly where it had been built to stand, and Sarah Mitchell, 32 years old, employed, housed clear-eyed, still the woman who went up the hill, began to write back. Some people waited their whole lives to find out what they were made of. Sarah Mitchell had found out on a frozen night under a highway overpass with a dying stranger and her last can of soup, and what she was made of had turned out to be exactly enough to save a life, enough to receive one, back enough to reach through a letter to a woman in a parking lot in Kenosha and say, "I see you. I know exactly where you are. Go make the call." She was not a symbol. She was not a miracle. She was a mother who had gone up the hill, and that it turned out was everything.